Calmly, the guild employee completed the registration, carefully handed the new adventurer a copper token, and sincerely wished him success in this difficult, trial-filled profession. Meanwhile, Rorin, a swordsman who joined the ranks of adventurers at the lowest, copper, rank, realized with surprise that this moment had finally come, although he did not expect it to actually happen. Despite inner resistance and bitter regret, he could not change anything. Reality gave no choice, especially due to financial hardship. He was completely penniless and saw no other way to survive. Thoughts swirled in his head about how he had ended up in front of the Adventurers Guild doors in this city. To figure it out, he mentally went back a few days and recalled how it all began. Since childhood, his life had been closely connected with the mercenary squad in which he grew up. Throughout all these years, he remained in this combat unit, completing tasks and fighting side by side with comrades. The unit went through wars, experiencing many victories and no fewer defeats. During his mercenary time, Rorin saw a lot and gained a lot of experience. But even such seemingly time-hardened groups eventually fall apart, and now their squad had come to an end. They entered a battle that should have been an easy and expected victory. But fate played a cruel joke on them. It ended in an unexpected and devastating defeat. Miraculously saved in that battle, he found himself completely cut off from his former comrades. Wandering alone, he finally reached this city and stood before the building of the local Adventurers Guild, well aware that adventurers were the same nomadic mercenaries, just working a little differently. All that was needed was to pay a fee. No one cared about your origin, past, or intentions, so anyone could become an adventurer, whoever they had been before. All he had left was the armor on his shoulders, a heavy two-handed sword, and a few silver coins. He simply did not want to wander the streets and roads aimlessly. Meanwhile, the guild was flooded with requests to complete various tasks: kill monsters, gather herbs and items, explore new territories, clean, escort, and that was only a small part. Travelers had to be jack of all trades, ready to handle a bunch of different tasks, and he could only take on what was allowed for the copper rank, and that greatly limited his choices. Moreover, he was completely alone, without the support of comrades. And although his combat skills were top-notch, he realized that even the simplest tasks alone became dangerous. He wondered if it was worth taking on such a simple task as ditch cleaning at all. It was then that a man appeared nearby, caught his thoughts, and asked if he was looking for work. The one who approached decided that Rorin, though an experienced swordsman, seemed confused and unable to decide which task to choose. He sighed and explained that their group lacked people for the front line, although overall there were enough members. Rorin mentally noted that if he were still a mercenary, he would have refused immediately. He knew that a mercenary was only a temporarily hired fighter, free in his decisions, but at the same time without any guarantees or support in battle. Under such conditions, the lack of reliable cover from the rear could easily cost a life. That is why mercenaries usually choose employers carefully, scrutinize the surroundings, and only then decide to cooperate. But sometimes exceptions happen, especially when a fighter has no money at all. The man added that the reward for completing the task as a team would be much greater than working alone. Roar asked what exactly the task they would have to perform was. He was pleased by the shown interest and said that a new member had joined their group, so they planned to complete the task as a group of 5. He suggested introducing everyone present, starting with the fact that Rowan would now be with him in the vanguard. Rowan briefly and politely said he was glad to meet them. The first introduced was a girl named Nellen. She turned out to be the interlocutor's childhood friend and dreamed of becoming a true adventurer. She was a thief and belonged to the copper rank of the guild. Then they introduced the next, a mage named Okusi, whom they met on the day of the guild registration and immediately joined in a group with. Okusi was also a copper rank adventurer. She was told that magic could only be used 3 times a day. Loren mentally doubted whether this was really something special. Then the man asked the last participant to introduce herself. It turned out she was a priestess named Lapis, a servant of the god of knowledge, and had just received her appointment, so she had little experience. Lapis quietly expressed hope that their joint mission would succeed, and Rorin confirmed his intention to cooperate. They said that after arriving in the city they met Lapis and relied on her divine spells. Lapis herself modestly noted that magic can only be used twice a day, and Rorin thought to himself that it no longer sounded so impressive, yet it still caused him doubts. The man who called himself the leader of the group introduced himself as Siaf, and with obvious confidence declared that one day he would be called a hero. He was a swordsman and an adventurer of the copper rank. Nellen enthusiastically declared that Sif was the strongest person in the world. He asked her not to praise him so much because he was embarrassed and said he was modest, as befits a hero, and was also glad that the newcomer was now nearby, and offered to tell about his journey. He recalled how at 6 years old he found records about that hero in the archives, and it greatly influenced his fate. Rorin noted to himself that the group's composition seemed quite balanced, but at the same time he was intrigued that besides him and Sif, the group consisted only of girls. Among the mercenaries there were almost no women, not because of their weakness but for other reasons, so he saw no problem in this. However, it seemed to him that Sif's story could go on for a long time. Several dozen minutes passed, filled with small and detailed particulars, and at the end Sif said that it was then he decided to become a hero himself. Rowan reminded them that it would be good to discuss the mission itself. Naylan intervened, enthusiastically declaring that the most interesting part was still ahead, and the story of Sif could not be interrupted. Rorin thought that when there are girls in the group, additional difficulties may arise between men and women. He realized that he was not just on a potentially dangerous mission, but also in a company where relationships between people could become a real test. Rorin, with a businesslike and straightforward expression, reminded that the group had not yet moved on to discussing the mission itself, and that, in his opinion, it should have been done long ago. He frankly admitted that he had lost his previous job, and now, left without income, wanted to engage in real work, not empty talk. He said he would discuss any proposals that came in because it was extremely important for him to get to work now. He could not waste time on unnecessary talks, especially since postponing this matter was unwise. After this, Sif, a little surprised, agreed with Rorin's logic, and admitted that since they had found common ground, it was indeed time to get to the heart of the task. But Naylan suddenly interrupted the conversation and doubted whether it was worth including Rorin in their group at all. She reminded him that he was a former mercenary, and sincerely worried whether it was safe and wise to travel alongside a person who would do anything for money, and aloud she wondered if his presence would bring problems to the group. Rorin mentally noted that such an attitude towards mercenaries was very familiar to him. Society often looks at such fighters through the prism of prejudice and distrust, and Sif calmly reminded Nolan that she was the one who agreed. The group lacked a frontline fighter, and Rorin was perfect for this role. Nolan, hesitating a little, confirmed that she agreed, but added that maybe they should look for another candidate. Okusi, interrupting the conversation, objected that under their conditions it was almost impossible for an adventurer of the required level to join an inexperienced group without a name and achievements. Rorin's presence was a real plus. Although he had no adventuring experience, he had real combat experience, and that was important. So Sif turned to Lapis to hear her opinion about the new member. Lapis thoughtfully said that she did not consider Rowan a bad person, and he did not cause her distrust, and Nalan immediately, ironically remarked that such her opinion was most likely connected with her past in the clergy, where few understood mercenaries. Lapis replied that in fact she had no opportunity to learn in detail about mercenaries in the church, so she judged Loren only by how he looked and behaved. Rorin calmly reminded everyone that being in a group was not a permanent obligation, but a one-time job, so temporary inconveniences were quite acceptable. Sif, feeling that objections had subsided, expressed a desire for Rorin to officially join the group, after which he announced the essence of the next mission. They needed to destroy goblins who had settled in the forest near a village 3 days' journey to the east. Nalung explained that the village was called Ain, and suggested that they abandon this request and try to find a more profitable task there. Okusi explained that probably they were asked to scout recently discovered ruins, but the guild usually gives such tasks only for proven and more experienced groups. Nellen regretfully noted that in that case their group would always get only the cheapest and least paid tasks. CIFE, without losing confidence, said they would complete the available tasks and show a worthy result. Then the guild would entrust them with more serious missions. Rorin, hearing this, tensely asked how many goblins were in the forest and how large their pack was. He admitted that there is no exact data. The peasants, encountering goblins during hunting, immediately fled, and he added that it does not matter how many of them are in the forest. Such enemies, in his opinion, do not pose a serious threat. Saifi ended the conversation. If there are no more questions, we set off tomorrow. Rorin still wanted to make sure that everyone was really ready, but Saifi had already given the order to prepare for the journey and insisted that everyone gather near the eastern gate the next morning. Rorin mentally estimated he needed to take food for 3 days and find lodging, but there was no money for medicine. The next day he came to the eastern gate earlier than the others and anxiously noticed that none of his companions had appeared yet. One of the guards, noticing him, pretended as if he had seen him before and as if he was involved in local affairs, and Rorin replied that he was just waiting for his people. They needed to set off in the morning. The guard felt that he could no longer fall asleep and was tired of standing in place. He had been on duty since dawn, He noticed that Rorin looked exhausted and asked if he had managed to rest well, to which Rorin honestly admitted that he had not been able to rest fully. The guard sighed with regret, saying the day would be hard, so he suggested talking a little to at least lighten the mood. He was bored, and he clarified whether Rorin was in this city for the first time, calling it a cafe. Rorin, hearing this, asked if the city was really called that, and the guard jumped up in surprise. He did not expect Rorin to be here, not even knowing the name of the city, which seemed strange to him, and Rorin only replied that certain events had happened to him that suddenly brought him here. The guard accepted this with understanding and smiling added that although Kofi is not the capital, it is a very pleasant, cozy town with delicious food and good people. He called Kofi his hometown and asked where Rorin had spent the night before. He pointed to the house on the right, or rather on the corner. The guard smiled and said that it was an old but reliable establishment where they cook really tasty food, so he suggested going there together after work. Rorin thought about the guard's words. He noted that he had never had a hometown. He had spent his whole life moving from one battlefield to another, so he could not even imagine what it was like to stay in one place and call it his own. He thought that maybe it was even for the better. Meanwhile, Sif approached the gate and noticed that Rorin was already there. The guard asked if they were comrades, and Rorin explained that these people were his companions only for one matter. The guard honestly admitted that it was not worth expecting much from a group whose leader was surrounded only by girls, hinting at some hidden motives. Rorin quietly chuckled to himself. There was more envy than sense in those words, but overall he agreed. Sifask asked how long he had already waited, and Rorin replied that since everyone had gathered, they could set off. It would take 3 days to reach the village. Sif suggested finding a cart to get there faster, and Rorin was filled with horror. All his training was for walking, and now without money, he would have to run after the cart. He thought about how fast he would have to move not to fall behind. Lapis approached him, sympathetically handed over 10 copper coins, and said that it would be enough for the trip to the village and back. She assured him there was no reason to doubt. It was simply a debt, and with hope said that maybe someday in the future he could help her too, calling it an investment in the future. Sif reported that they had managed to arrange a carriage with a driver who would take them directly to the village of Ian for 5 coins. Lapis confirmed she was ready to depart. Thank you, Warren, he thought again. He noticed that he had unexpectedly become indebted and realized this was unlikely to end well. Sif thanked with relief. They had found transport and finally arrived, because without it, they would have had to spend energy and time on an exhausting journey on foot. No one admitted with relief that they were incredibly lucky. Walking would have been a waste of strength and precious time, and the driver smiled and waved his hand, as if to say, "Don't thank me, I'm returning home unburdened," having just sold all his grain. When he learned that this was the very group of adventurers entrusted with exterminating the goblins settled near his village, he became enthusiastic and, convinced of their cause, promised to get them there as soon as possible, because he did not want to waste time. The welfare of his native land depended on it. S politely thanked him for the help. Rorin, without saying it aloud, mentally noted that in this case the fare for the ride could be symbolic. The coachman was still returning empty-handed. Naylan assured them that they would deal with the goblins and asked them not to worry about the outcome. Warren wanted to discuss the group's plan of action, but it was clearly made known around that his initiative was unnecessary, so this conversation seemed pointless. Kuker said they would stop here for the night and set off in the morning to reach the village by noon. After explaining everything, he wished everyone good night and went to rest. Sif also announced that the group should rest before the journey. Naylan, rubbing her back, complained about fatigue, noting that riding in the cart was by no means comfortable. Sif, agreeing with her, reminded that they would both take turns that night. Rorin was surprised and could not understand how 2 people could stay awake all night, and Sai explained that they would take turns. It was impossible to endure without breaks until morning. Rorin again explained why there would be only 1 person on guard. Logically, guards should be in pairs, especially when they are in open space, outside walls and fortifications. In his soul, he was passionately outraged. Mercenaries and soldiers usually behave that way in groups or pairs, especially at night when danger could sneak up from anywhere. In his opinion, if the group camped out in the open, it would be wiser for each member to participate in the night watch. Nalin sharply replied that since the leader had already decided, there was no point in further discussion. Rorin agreed without unnecessary words and clarified that if he and Sifi were to take turns, they needed to decide who would go first. Sif, clearly tired, suggested to Rorin to take his post first, because he himself wanted to go to bed earlier and rest a little. Rorin nodded and said he would wake him in the middle of the night when it was time for the shift change. Late that night, sitting by the fire and staring into the darkness, Loren heard quiet, muffled voices from the tent. He felt that his shift would last longer than expected. Those who were sleeping clearly did not intend to get up, and he recalled that he had spent the previous night without sleep because after losing the squad he could not calm down. Earlier he always slept among comrades. Their presence gave him peace. Now he felt loneliness and anxiety, constantly remembering his battle friends and hoping they were alive, and deep in his heart believing that although the chances were small, fate would one day bring them together again. At that moment Lapis appeared nearby. She approached so quietly that she slightly startled him, and she immediately apologized, explaining that she did not want to scare him. She explained that she could not sleep in the tent next to him, so she decided to sit by him for a while. Rorin ironically remarked that it was a real problem. Insomnia before the mission. Lapis sadly said she was not sure if she could sleep until it was over. She asked to sit with him a little longer. Loren wondered if this happened often, since he believed that even those who work at night should maintain discipline. He added that, of course, he understands the rush, especially when a person does not know if there will be a tomorrow for them. And Lapis smiled, admitting that she would like to say that such things happen rarely, but in reality, it is quite the opposite. This happened constantly, and those who arranged it remained carefree and joyful, while she only regretted that they could never choose the right time or place for their desires. Although according to her faith, God commanded to be fruitful and multiply, strictly speaking, they truly acted according to God's commandments. Rorin, hearing this, remarked with surprise how openly she pondered such things, for he imagined that priests and shamans should be much more reserved. He asked which god she served. He knew there were many gods, and Lapis replied that her god was Kukula, the god of knowledge, and that gods, unlike people, simply cannot be explained. She insisted that he see in them only pillars, symbols of higher ideas, not living beings. She herself felt no fear, but warned that her views might not please everyone, so she advised him to be careful. Roan thanked her for the warning and honestly admitted that, being a mercenary, he had no formal education, so he might not understand theology. Lapis, however, asked with interest why he decided to become an adventurer. Rorin, without hesitation, calmly and simply said that his squad no longer existed. Lapis, a little embarrassed, apologized, probably feeling that she had touched on something personal. Rorin gently replied that nothing terrible had happened, because for him it was a usual thing. He calmly explained that in a warrior's life there are victories and defeats, and unfortunately this time his unit was simply unlucky. They were defeated. He admitted that he could have tried to join another squad and continue his old life, but it so happened that he ended up far from the battlefield and fled, left alone. After arriving in this city, he had nowhere to go, so joining the Adventurers Guild became the only way to earn money, and Lapis, upon hearing this, said excitedly that he must be incredibly strong. She pressed his sword to her waist, stunned by the size, and admitted she was impressed by such a huge weapon. Rorin calmly explained that it was a two-handed sword, but it was not always possible to hold it with both hands. So he trains to wield the sword with the right hand, then the left, and even suggested comparing sizes. Lapis agreed with interest. He asked her if she was sure about that, and she, a bit coquettishly, asked if it was really thinner. Rowan mentally confirmed, without a doubt, she was indeed thinner than his sword. To her next confused comment, he calmly replied that the sword was clearly bigger, and Lapis somewhat embarrassedly admitted that it was obvious anyway. Rorin noticed that dawn was approaching. Lapis agreed that they had gotten so caught up in conversation that they hadn't noticed how time had flown. Rorin apologized for making her spend the whole night with him. He added that for a mercenary such night watches were a usual thing, but for a priestess it was probably boring. Lapis, on the contrary, said that the conversation with him seemed very interesting to her. Rorin, nodding, suggested that they start preparing to leave, and Lapis agreed, supporting his proposal. Meanwhile, Sifok Apend, realizing it was already light, thought with surprise why he hadn't been woken up for the guard change, and Rorin replied that everything went well and there was nothing to worry about. The coachman announced that everyone was already awake, and as soon as they had breakfast, they would set off immediately. To the village, he said, was not far at all. Rorin thought that as soon as this task was completed, he would have to look for another way to earn a living. Soon the coachman shouted that they had arrived and pointed to the village of Ian. Lapis, looking around the surroundings, noticed that the village was tightly surrounded by dense forest, and CF suggested that it was from there that the goblins, who now threatened the locals, had come. Rorin mentally decided to first interrogate the witnesses to narrow the search and not waste time, but Cephas suggested immediately heading straight into the forest. Rorin stopped him. Before rushing into battle, several important steps needed to be taken, and he reminded that this was a mission from the village, so it was more logical to first visit the elder to better understand the situation. For him, it was quite natural to first find out how many opponents there were and where they were approximately located to make a plan. Starting the matter without even meeting the one who hired them seemed strange and reckless to him. Naylan, clearly irritated by his too serious tone, sharply replied that the task was simple. They needed to destroy the goblins, and why drag it out with unnecessary ceremonies if even the coachman could report their arrival? She wondered how much time they would need to complete such a simple task, and Rorin noticed that it was precisely such words that underestimated the work itself. He recalled that even his former commander, although generally despising mercenaries, always considered a meeting with a contractor a normal and obligatory part of any business. The coachman interrupted the conversation and, to avoid a quarrel, said he would talk to the village elder himself, and the group only had to destroy the goblins. Sif took command of the formation and briefly explained the arrangement. He would go ahead, Naylan would take the center and cover the mages Lapis and Okusi, and Rorin would stay at the rear and watch the back. He insisted that everyone see the matter through to the end, and the villagers sighed with relief. After these words, he led the group into the forest. Nylon, looking at Loren, said they could do without those perpetually tense mercenaries. Okusi, a bit irritated, noted that someone had to be the shield in battle, and that without this role, they could not manage. Lapis gently added that if someone got wounded, she would use healing magic. Lun immediately hurried to clarify that magic should only be used if CF was injured. Rowan mentally noted that they had entered the forest without receiving any information about the goblins, and realized with horror that now they would have to wander the forest blindly, wasting time and energy. As they walked through the forest, Nalan noticed berry bushes and joyfully shouted that they were raspberries, and Sif enthusiastically suggested gathering them. After all, they hadn't eaten fresh berries for a long time. Okusi noticed that donkey grass was growing here. It could be used as magical material. Lapis loudly reminded them that the main goal was to exterminate the goblins and urged them to focus. Rorin mentally noted that everyone was doing their own thing and no one was progressing toward the goal, and if this continued, the goblins would find them themselves. Lapis ironically remarked that it seemed Rorin had already given up. He calmly asked if she hadn't given up yet. Lapis admitted that she felt awkward in this situation, and Rorin dryly said that she would have to deal with it. She, in turn, said that she felt uncomfortable when he addressed her informally. Rorin tried to call her Lady Lapis. She said that Lapis was fine, and asked why he sounded so uncertain. Roran admitted that he had never addressed a girl by her name before, so he suggested that she also call him Rorin. Lapis decided to continue calling him Mr. Rowan, and immediately hurried to explain that she did not mean to show any distance between them by this. Rowan replied reservedly that she would address him as it was convenient for her, and Lapis confirmed with a barely noticeable smile that she would continue to call him as she was used to. At that moment, Rorin suddenly noticed something quite unusual. No one stopped abruptly. She reported that she heard a sound in the forest, and Rorin mentally caught that someone was really approaching, and this feeling was growing stronger. Sif turned to Nalan with concern. If someone was nearby, it could be monsters, and Nalan replied that she did not know who or what was approaching, but the sound was clear and definitely not accidental. The next second, everything escalated. Okusi was wounded. It was a signal for an ambush. Goblins attacked them and everything happened lightning fast, and Rorin was outraged seeing that his comrades turned away from the enemy at the worst moment. Lapis, trying to protect the group, suggested casting a protective spell, but we decisively stopped her. We thought it was not the time. He instantly assessed the situation and understood where the arrow had come from. The place turned out to be extremely inconvenient for close combat. He bitterly regretted not having at least a short sword, and still stabbed one of the enemies with a dagger, but the wound was superficial. He mentally noted that the strike was too shallow. Sif roared with rage. The goblins took advantage of the moment to retreat and seemed to be preparing to flee, so he ordered to chase them. He believed this was a chance to reach their lair. Roar mentally noticed again that no one cared about his opinion, although he still tried to express doubt. Sif replied heatedly that their task was to exterminate the goblins, and now that a trail had appeared, they had to go to the end. Otherwise, the whole mission would be in vain. Nalan supported him, and at the same time reproached Rorin for excessive caution, reminding him that the leader's decision must be obeyed, not judged. Rorin, though resisting inwardly, noted that the mission itself did not order the destruction of the goblin lair. Meanwhile, the group moved forward, and Rorin and Lapis lagged behind. Lapis felt that although Sif moved forward together with Okusi, she felt much calmer staying close to Rorin. Priests and mages needed to be protected in battle. He asked if she was really confident in her decision, and she firmly said she was ready. Rorin noticed. On the ground, Goblin blood traces were clearly visible, and now finding the enemies was much easier. Rorin approached Lapis with a passionate question. What she thought about the fighting abilities of their group and, most importantly, how strong the swordsman Sif was. He warned, goblins reproduce like a storm, and their danger lies in their numbers. Individually they are weak, so if they cannot be destroyed immediately, a clear plan is needed. But he saw that the group acted chaotically and slowly, and this did not inspire confidence in success at all. He added that in such a situation, one could only rely on the swordsman's strength, so he wanted to check how skilled Sif was in this role. Lapis replied that as a former mercenary he had probably heard of a fighter nicknamed Demonic Swordsman, a legendary figure known to many. Rorin confirmed that he had heard that name. He recalled that enemies who faced this swordsman were doomed to inevitable death. His allies always emerged victorious. No one wanted to see such a warrior against them on the battlefield. He asked if Lapis really thought that Sif could match such a hero. Lapis chuckled and said that even 10 million Sif would not be enough to defeat the one called the Demonic Swordsman. Rorin sharply remarked that such confidence borders on madness. Lapis smiled slightly and noted that he himself was now in the same situation. Understanding her words, he sighed and admitted that perhaps he was behaving like a madman. There was no money, and wherever he looked, he would have to go into debt. Lapis said with light irony that he could only sympathize, and Rorin, surprised by her intonation, mentally noted that it was strange to hear sympathy as a statement spoken as if a question. At that moment, Sif said he had come across a cave that might be a goblin lair, showed that the blood trail led straight inside, and added that even Nalon confirmed they were moving in the right direction. Rorin realized that the cave was too narrow. His great sword could hardly be swung here, and he doubted whether it was worth entering, as the weapon would be almost useless there. Nalon sharply replied that if he doubted, he could return, but then he should not count on a share of the reward, and Sifei tried to calm him down, saying that goblins were not such serious enemies and everything would be fine. He handed Rorin the weapon picked up on the road, thinking it might come in handy. Rorin grabbed it and mentally agreed that it was better than nothing. Sif gave the order. Okusi was to light the path with magic, Nalon to search the surroundings for traps or other dangers. If nothing suspicious was found, they were to enter the cave. Okusi instantly spoke the magical words, summoned the light spells to illuminate the dark depths ahead. Ra thought to himself that such a simple thing as lighting the way wasted limited and valuable magical energy. He wondered why they hadn't at least taken a simple lamp for torture. It would be much easier and more effective, and in general, he was troubled by the question of what they had in their luggage. Nellin finished the inspection and reported that no traps or pitfalls were found. Sif suggested that there might be people inside who were kidnapped, so they needed to hurry to rescue them as soon as possible. Rohan mentally noted that Sif's confidence was too strong. There could very well be an ambush inside, and the traps might have gone completely unnoticed. Sif ordered them to move on without hesitation. He decided that the goblins had retreated in haste and had not even left guards at the entrance, and considered this a great stroke of luck. Okusi added that goblins are primitive creatures, and if they are wounded, they are unlikely to think of setting up guards. Rorin again wondered if they were rushing too much, not really understanding the situation. Lapis, who was walking nearby, asked him to share her thoughts about what was happening. He said that the very absence of guards at the entrance clearly indicated a trap. Lapis asked if goblins could be cunning enough to organize this, and Rorin replied that he personally did not know goblins, but even primates post someone to watch around, and he did not think goblins were dumber than monkeys. Lapis aloud puzzled over the difference between the intelligence of monkeys and goblins. She recalled that monkeys can unite into communities and even use primitive tools, so in terms of intelligence they are not so far from humans. Rorin realized to herself that somehow these reflections interested her now, and probably it was natural. After all, she was a priestess of the god of knowledge. Lapis noticed that Siaf was thoughtful and cautiously asked if everything was all right. At that moment, Siaf whispered that ahead there was a room where he had seen lights. Rorin thought that if they see light from the room, the enemy could just as easily notice them. Naylan suggested that it might be an ambush set by goblins. Okusi added that in that case, the danger was especially great if there were archers inside. Nalan and Oikuzi were supposed to follow them. Rorin shook her head again. It seemed reckless to walk straight into a trap. This bravery caused both admiration and anxiety, because such a decision was essentially like suicide, especially considering that one of the 3 daily magics had already been spent on a direct strike. Akuse still cast a protective spell, trying to somehow curb the risk. Sif thanked her and said he relied on her magic. Lapis turned to Loren, worried if that would be enough. He vaguely replied that it was hard to predict. Lapis asked what he would do in a similar situation. Lauren, without hesitation, honestly said that in his case, he would have blocked the cave entrance with fresh branches and dry grass, then set it all on fire, because the exit would be blocked and the heat and smoke would rush inside. This would be the simplest and most effective way to get rid of the ambush. Lapis noted. For such a method, oil is needed, Rorin confirmed. Without oil and flint from raw wood, fire cannot be kindled, and since they did not even have the simplest supplies, the only option was to resign themselves, or perhaps retreat. He sighed to himself, feeling how hard it is when there is not enough money even for the simplest equipment. Lapis briefly nodded, showing that he understood. Sif announced that he would go inside together with Rorin. Rorin, calm and cold, reminded that he had no protective magic. Okusi noted that he had a huge sword which could quite serve as a shield, and Nalan only agreed. Rorin mentally felt, in such a narrow passage, drawing a sword is almost impossible, and using it as a shield, due to its weight and size, would only hinder oneself. Sif apologized and explained that he could not cast a second protective spell because he already had one on him. Rorin calmly replied that it was simply bad luck, and mentally decided that now he must survive on his own, whatever the circumstances. Sif shouted the command to move forward with enthusiasm, and Rorin thought that after such a loud announcement all enemies in the area would definitely learn about them. He remarked to Riley that it seemed to be a plan, to announce their arrival in advance, and honestly added that magic is really convenient. It does not deflect arrows but allows them to bounce off the body. Sif, full of fighting spirit, declared that now he would deal with all the enemies, but he did not manage to finish his report. He stumbled and fell with a crash. Nalan instantly rushed to him to help. Lapis also wanted to rush forward, but Rorin managed to restrain her, and Nalan persistently called Sif, asking him to get up. Lapis noticed depressions in the ground, possibly a trap. Rorin tensely said that they must be especially careful because there is clearly someone in the cave who thinks and knows how to set ambushes. Sif, with shining eyes, held a worn but clearly favored book in his hands, and said with admiration that the hero in it is simply magnificent. He was sure that before him was a true example to follow, a real hero worthy of admiration and respect. Sif passionately dreamed of becoming a man like him, to travel the world, perform brave deeds, and one day earn the right to be called a hero. He firmly promised himself to become an adventurer who would be honored as a hero. But in reality, there was nothing romantic about it. Nalant howled in pain and rage when the goblins suddenly appeared and attacked from an ambush. Sif was in shock and barely understood what was happening. Only one thought was spinning in his head. This should not have happened. These were just goblins, not a demon army, and he could not believe that something so serious was happening. Rorin carefully observed the situation and instantly realized that one of the goblins stood out from the others, noticeably bigger and much more formidable. He assumed that this might be their leader, possibly a higher form. Lapis explained that among goblins, special creatures are sometimes born. At first they are ordinary goblins, but over time, gaining experience and strength, they transform and become many times more dangerous. She decided, this goblin holds a staff and is dressed unlike the others. Therefore, most likely this is a goblin wizard, one of the most dangerous higher forms. Such an opponent knows how to use magic and has knowledge that makes him deadly dangerous. Rohan coldly thought that fighting such an enemy without preparation was extremely reckless. It was better not to approach him at all, but everything was already out of control because Siaf and the rest of the group were already drawn into the fight. Rorin sharply turned around, noticing movement behind. Enemies were also approaching from the rear. He realized that retreat was becoming impossible. Okusi decisively pronounced a spell, scattering sand, to lull her enemies to sleep. But at that very moment, the goblin mage also used magic, and everything burst into bright light. Rorin, watching Lapis fall to her knees, tried to understand what kind of magic it was. It was so weak that he approached and fearfully asked if she could no longer move and what exactly had happened to her, and realized she had lost almost all her power. Okusi screamed in panic that her spell had somehow failed. No one fell asleep despite the magic. She begged the enemies not to come closer, and Siaf, wanting to protect his comrades, rushed forward shouting, and ordered the goblins not to touch the girls. But his defense failed, and he was wounded right in the battle. A desperate phrase kept spinning relentlessly in his head. This cannot be, because he was supposed to be a hero. Okusi grabbed her. She desperately screamed for help, but it was already too late. Rorin felt that all hopes were in vain. It was impossible to save them. The escape route was blocked. He turned to Lapis, who lay exhausted, and with a tightening heart, asked if she really could no longer move, and if she had no strength at all. A sudden anxious thought flashed through his mind. The enemies were already approaching from both sides. Soon they would be surrounded from all directions. Lapis, looking at him heavily, told him to leave her. She considered herself a burden, and said that he could still get out on his own. Rorin, hearing her cold and resigned words, mentally noted that her way of speaking about herself was strangely calm, almost detached. Lapis continued, explaining that women most likely would not be killed immediately. Unlike men, their opponents would kill them without hesitation, so she insisted that he go without her. Lauren had just told her to shut up, adding that he would bite his tongue if she kept saying such things. He remembered how not long ago she herself said that her place was beside him, that she wanted to be close because she thought it was right, and that she had lent him money hoping that someday he could help her. He quietly whispered to her to wait, warning that they were about to be shaken. The decision was made. They could wait no longer. Grabbing Lapis, he rushed forward, ignoring the arrows flying after them. He suddenly realized the way back was closed for them. The only way out was to move forward. Mana Chao Kamaha Chao, Odin Mero Piv. He saw, behind the goblin mage was a narrow passage, and only through it could they slip. The goblin mage did not remain indifferent. He attacked the fleeing one with fireballs, and Rorin realized that there was not enough time. He rushed forward and with a fierce jerk cut off the goblin's head, putting an end to the main threat. Rory knew that surviving was a real miracle, but that didn't mean the fight was over. When they would start chasing them was unknown, so the only chance for salvation was to run away as fast as possible. But with every step, it seemed to him more and more that they were moving away from the exit, and he didn't know if that was good. They were diving deeper and deeper into dangerous unexplored caves. The only hope echoing in his head was that somewhere ahead there would be a detour. But for now, he saw only complete darkness and sadly thought that the debts he once got involved in turned out to be damn expensive. Despite the fatigue and tension, Lapis noticed that Rorin moved strangely deftly and quickly in complete darkness, as if this was not a new situation for him, but a familiar environment. Suddenly Rorin interrupted her and ordered silence. Her voice distracted and prevented him from concentrating. Lapis irritably replied that she felt like a sack being dragged, and that she was tired of such treatment. Lauren, keeping calm, responded that it was hard for him too. After all, he was carrying her, not the other way around, and added that if she wanted to survive, it was better to be quiet. Lapis agreed and promised not to interfere anymore, but then, in a quieter voice, said that she deserved at least a little better treatment. She explained that she was not asking to be treated like a princess, but only wanted them to stop treating her like a shapeless cargo. Rorin picked her up on his back, and feeling the change, she thanked him for saving her. Rorin mentally noted that her voice had returned to its usual tone. Lapis finally asked the question that had long been smoldering in her head. Why did he save her when he left the others? Rorin did not delve into thoughts. He calmly replied that it was his decision. He simply wanted to, because she was lucky and because he owed her money. He asked her to choose any of these reasons. All of them could be considered correct. Lapis was not satisfied with this answer and added that maybe he did it because he was a good person. Rorin replied that if that were the case, he would not have left the others. Lapis stubbornly said, no matter what happened, it was her he saved, and she would consider it an act of kindness, and Rorin brushed off the conversation, allowing her to believe what was closer to her. He changed the subject and returned again to the strange moments of the fight. He was eager to find out why her speech suddenly changed and why she lost the ability to move. Lapis realized that there was no point in hiding further and confessed. Since he had already seen, he would tell everything. She started with a question. Did he know what demons were? Rorin replied that he knew about their existence and explained that besides humans, different races live in the world. Half-beasts and demons, who were usually feared. They had developed bodies, possessed magic, and were almost uninterested in other races. They communicate with others only for their own benefit, have a bad reputation, and are rarely found among humans. Their mentality is completely different, and even in his mercenary squad, it was believed that it was better to keep away from demons. The church considers them apostates and abominations because they do not believe in the supreme god. A demon is recognized by bright purple eyes, and there is also a legendary figure, the Lord of Demons, before whom the whole world trembles, although he does not seek conquests. Lapis calmly said that she was a demon. Lauren at first did not believe it. He told himself that she was a priestess, and she did not look like a demon at all. Her eyes were not violet. Lapis explained simply, she does not believe in the supreme god or the mother goddess, as humans do. Demons mostly honor the god of knowledge. He teaches to strive for new discoveries and knowledge, and for demons, knowledge itself is sacred, especially magic. She said that she can use both divine spells and ordinary magic, Other gods do not have this. Usually, if you serve one, the choice of means is very limited. Rorin finally realized where she got this strange power. The same one that explained the light magic he had seen earlier. It turned out she was both a mage and a priestess, and he asked if human priests of the god of knowledge could also use magic. Lapis replied that maybe someone could do it, but it is unlikely that there is a person equal to her in abilities. She is a demon, and from birth her powers are higher than human ones. Ruin mentally concluded, if it were really possible to combine both magic and divine spells, everyone would become priests of this god. He then asked with interest why she, a demon, decided to become an adventurer, since, as he heard, demons rarely communicate with other races and hide in inaccessible mountains in the middle of the continent. Lapis replied that this is a mistaken opinion. In fact, many demons live among humans. They just skillfully disguise themselves, behave cautiously, and do not show all their power. Humans simply do not notice them. Rorin asked if they really deliberately limit their abilities. Lapis confirmed and said that this explains her current condition. She added that her body is not quite normal. Loren felt that she could move her hand again. Lapis explained that her limbs and even her eyes are fragile magical instruments controlled by mana, and every movement requires a lot of energy. She reminded him that he himself saw how Okushi failed to activate magic, most likely due to the so-called managing effect imposed by the goblin mage. Such an effect is too complex for a simple goblin, so he probably used a magical item rather than his own spell. Rorin took out the pendant and showed it, suggesting that this was the very magical tool. Lapis looked at the pendant and decided that it was probably that device. She did not know where the goblin got such an artifact, but she noticed with relief that, fortunately, it would not be used constantly. It would still take her some time to fully regain the ability to move, but at least she was already controlling with her eyes. Rorin mentally understood why she asked to get rid of that thing earlier, but as long as the device was turned off and inactive, he could keep it with him. He asked what happened to her speech and why it suddenly changed. Lapis explained that the strange manner was not a local dialect, it was her natural way of speaking. Because the magical energy was exhausted, she could not move either her hands or feet, and when she found herself in a critical situation, her consciousness automatically switched to combat mode. She explained that her speech and behavior are completely different, depending on her mental state, in peaceful times and in battle. Rorin absorbed this information, nodded, and said he understood everything, but again noted, the strangeness around her is increasing. Lapis returned to the conversation about the recent fight and honestly said that asking him to leave was the smartest and most logical decision. But she thanked him for not listening to her and continuing to carry her despite everything. She added that although demons are defamed, they do not forget good deeds. Gorin simply nodded and said that she could settle with him later. But for now, they needed to find a way out of these cursed caves, and he added that he still felt something was wrong with this cave. Lapis agreed and said that they had probably moved far from the place where the goblins first attacked them, but the end was still not in sight. She was mistaken in thinking that goblins lived in an ordinary natural cave. This place was clearly something bigger. Rorin confirmed her words. He mentally noted that on the way they came across many rooms obviously used by goblins. If they really had already passed through these places, then in the worst case, they would be stuck forever in the same corridors. He hoped that they would reach the end and then find the way back. But the very appearance of the corridors suggested this was not a matter of nature. They were too identical and even, as if someone had deliberately made them that way. Rorin suggested turning back. Lapis reminded them that if they did so, they would have to go through that dangerous room again. Rorin quietly remarked that it would be better if there was an exit on the other side. Lapis replied that if an exit really was found, Rohan would be very lucky. Rohan did not rely on luck and warned her not to count too much on his fortune, and Lapis admitted that she herself was unlikely to live up to his expectations. She said that when she left her native lands, the demon territory, her parents gave her these artificial limbs and eyes instead of real ones, so she was able to fit in, become an adventurer, and join the group. Loren, hearing this, sighed and said that perhaps she was even less lucky than him. Lapis agreed that her only luck was that around her were only frivolous and indifferent people who were unable to understand who she really was. Loren advised her not to continue if it was hard for her, but she went on anyway, saying that her real hands, legs, and eyes were hidden somewhere in the human lands by her parents. Her goal was to study the human world, and she would not return home until she found her lost parts. Rorin said that he had no intention of arranging a competition for the title of the most unfortunate. Lapis added that if she managed to return the lost body parts, she would be able to reconnect with them and become whole. Then Rorin advised her to return to her homeland and ask her parents directly about everything. At that moment, Lapis noticed a dead end ahead and pointed to it. Rorin confidently said that in a real dead end there is no light, and Lapis thought that it might be the light at the end of the tunnel. But she did not rule out that goblins were lurking ahead again. Rorin reported that there were no goblin tracks, asked her to extinguish the magical lights, then asked if she could stand up, and Lapis apologized and admitted that she was a real trouble. Revenant said that everything was fine, but if there was real danger, he would have to drop her, so he asked her to be ready, and Lapis agreed understandingly, knowing that in battle she might not even let him draw his weapon. Rorin hoped that he would not have to fight. He came across a dead end but noticed a barely visible light breaking through a crack in the wall. Lapis suggested that she could crawl there on all fours, but immediately admitted that her hands and feet hardly obeyed, and she herself would not dare to go into the unknown. Roar wondered if she would get stuck with her backside in that gap. He suggested knocking down the wall and widening the passage, saying they would have to make a lot of noise. He asked Lapis to watch out for anyone appearing. Lapis promised to be careful. Rowan wondered again if he would finish the task before some pursuer appeared. He assessed the strength of the wall and decided he could manage. Soon the passage became wide enough for him to crawl through. Lapis praised him. Although it took a long time, he did an excellent job. Rorin said the main thing was that no one managed to catch up with them. He ordered that he would climb out first, then pull her out after him, and apologized for the inconvenience. Lapis replied that everything was fine. After all, they were in the same boat. Rorin, though tired, still gathered his last strength and moved forward. He asked what she had seen. He really wanted to hear her opinion. Lapis, looking around the walls with interest, sincerely admired that they were made of an incredible material. A building mixture created from mana and Rorin, pointing to the strange glow, clarified what it was about. Lapis explained that this is a special building material of an ancient civilization, the manufacturing process of which is still unknown, but one thing is clear. It absorbs mana directly from the air and transforms it into light. Rorin, having heard about the ancient civilization, froze and quickly processed the meaning of these words in his mind, while Lapis explained in more detail that long ago there was a state of incredible prosperity, distinguished by a high level of magic. Its people mastered sorcery and ruled over most of the world. They say that not only humans lived there but also half-breeds, beastmen and demons. All races coexisted peacefully, and the ruins show that almost all influential figures of that civilization were mages. Their cities rose into the air and literally hung above the ground. But one day this country disappeared, and its people scattered across the world, possibly founding new states in different parts of the world. Rorin understood. If these were truly the ruins of an ancient civilization, everything here could be worth a fortune. Lap was sure that sooner or later this place would be plundered by the Adventurers Guild or ordinary treasure hunters. Rorin bitterly admitted that it looked far from rosy. Lapis glanced around and suggested scraping some material off the wall. Its glow, though faint, would serve as a light source, and the object itself was very valuable for research. Rora noticed that shards were already lying on the floor, pointed at them, and Lapis enthusiastically agreed. One of the pieces was simply incredible. It became clear again. If they really were in the ruins of an ancient civilization, then this by no means promised anything good. Lapis asked him why he thought so. She said that such places could be described with one word. Contradictory. Rorin inquired if she could already stand up. Lapis replied that she could not yet. She explained that, as he said earlier, such places are indeed dangerous, but at the same time there are completely safe areas without traps or threats. Rorin added that the most impressive of all the ruins he knew was a room that resembled a toilet. Everything there was at the highest level. A sewage purification system. No smell, no guards, no magical traps. Lapis smiled, amazed at how strange it was. In such a secluded and vulnerable place, no one thought about protection. Rorin nodded. Indeed, no one thought about it. Lapis thought that maybe these ruins were not so dangerous, and there were far fewer real threats here. Rorin was thinking to himself about what kind of ruins these were. Lapis was thinking the same. Rorin said he hoped it was safe here, but warned Lapis to stay alert, as he himself would. Lapis promised to be on guard, to catch magical signals and notice traps, and in return asked him to drive away enemies if they appeared. Rorin chuckled a little, pointed to the sword, and said that this was exactly what the weapon was for. In the worst case, they could return through the same hole into the goblin cave. He did not consider them that dangerous, but of course the best thing was to avoid a fight and calmly climb to the surface. Lapis was not sure that everything would be so simple, and Rorin agreed with her. He said he did not really believe in God and did not seek communion, then suddenly tightly gripped the sword hilt and listened cautiously, which made Lapis shudder inside. His sharp movement scared her. She called him, asking what had happened, and Rorin, listening carefully, said that someone was approaching. Lapis assessed her strength, decided that she could stop the attackers with magic, and asked to give her a sign at the right moment. A whisper sounded from the side. People were whispering about the one standing before them. A suspicious man with a girl on his back, and everyone wondered how these two ended up in the unexplored ruins. Someone even suggested it might be an illusion. One of them immediately denied this. He felt warmth coming from them, so they were real. In his opinion, it was not worth going there for a walk. Suddenly, 4 people appeared before Rorin and Lapis, and Rorin instantly noticed silver tokens on their chests. They were adventurers of the silver rank. The first man, with a barely noticeable smile, said that if they had escaped from goblins and now got lost in the ruins, then this was, at the very least, a very unfortunate coincidence. The second member of the group added that since their squad had died and these two survived, it meant luck was still on their side. At that moment, one of the girls in their group grabbed the first man by the ear. He screamed at the top of his lungs, calling her by name, Nim, and begging her not to pull so hard because she could tear off his ear. Nim calmly stated that if he did not obey, then perhaps he did not need his ears. In the dusty semi-darkness of the ancient ruins, 4 new adventurers appeared before Rorin and Lapis. Chak, a thieving fighter and silver rank adventurer. Nim and Archer with sharp tongues and equally sharp gazes, also silver rank adventurers. Ritz, a reserved swordsman with the posture of a commander. And finally Colts, an elder mage in worn but well-kept clothes. Colts, noticing how Rohan was staring at Nim, smiled with a slight mockery and asked if it was his first time seeing an elf. Rohan blushed, admitted it was, apologized for his rudeness, and realized that staring like that was impolite. Colts jokingly said that such attention was indeed understandable. She was a true beauty. Nim did not appreciate the magician's remark, and threateningly said that if he did not stop, she might lose her eyes. Colts, smiling, admitted that despite his age, he did not want to lose his sight at all. Nim, with steely calm, said that this time one eye would be enough for her. Ritz, tired of their verbal quarrels, asked everyone to calm down and added that they were too troublesome. He immediately got to the point. He said they understood Rorin and Lapis's situation and under other circumstances would have led them to the exit. But now they were busy with their mission, and Nim added that this mission was to scout the ruins near the village of Ayin, and asked if they had heard about them. Rorin recalled how Milan had spoken about this task, the one they had abandoned in search of something more profitable, and suddenly realized fate had brought them here, to these newly found, potentially dangerous ruins. Chuck felt, unknown ruins often hide danger, but also offer a chance for good money. Their group tried to grab the task first, but soon got involved in a competition with other adventurers. The Colts explained that there was an unspoken competition between them and their rivals. Whoever's results proved more useful to the guild would receive a bigger reward, so they couldn't waste time. Rorin assured them that he had no intention of interfering with their work, and asked only one thing, to indicate which way one could exit the ruins. Ritz couldn't answer immediately, admitting that they themselves did not yet know the exact path. Rorin said reservedly that this was indeed bad luck. Ritz quickly responded that they had not lost their way and had been recording the route all along. He let out a roar and laughed to himself. Did he really look like he thought they had failed? He turned to Lapis to check if she was all right. She noticed that he was looking at her quite openly, and Ritz remarked that although he had never heard of a person paralyzed by fear, the eyes of someone who has to be carried on the back should not be so heavy. Rorin did not mince words and directly asked why they could not find the way back. Ritz sighed and admitted that it was all Chuck's fault. He did not notice the trap. The whole group fell into a pit. They were lucky that there were no deadly spikes or poisonous blades below, but the fall was from such a height that it was clearly above the floor. Chuck added that if someone had stayed above, they could have been pulled out, but unfortunately, everyone fell through. Ritz, offended, said he would never forgive Chuck for falling on him. Chuck waved it off. What difference did it make whether he fell on him or on the floor? Nim, looking at them, said that if Chuck wanted to say his last wish, he should do it before she punished him. He chuckled and added with a smile that he was standing in line. Ritz returned to the topic and explained that despite all their thoughts, they still had not found the exit, and Loren nodded, showing that he understood everything. Ritz said that after the fall they were injured, but they had potions, so they somehow managed to recover. It was because of this that he had a question. Lapis, assessing the situation, said that she had one chance left to cast a healing spell. It was much more effective than any potion, and if they waited a bit she could use it again. and these adventurers seemed unwilling to waste their potions and relied on her magic. Rorin immediately understood. They could leave him and take only Lapis. Lapis explained, "Roran can stand up for himself and fight, but she herself is not even able to move. She will have to be carried. If one of the new companions does this, their combat power will decrease. And if they decide to leave her, it will happen so quickly and quietly that no one will even notice." Ritz jumped into the conversation, said he heard everything, and asked if they really thought that he and his comrades were capable of such a thing. Roran and Lapis answered in unison that it indeed looked that way. Ritz gave up, admitting that they really looked like villains and therefore could not argue. Nim decisively said that if anyone dared to suggest leaving the man and taking only the girl, she would personally save such a person from life. Ritz summed up simply, "If something dangerous happens, let Lapis cast a healing spell at their request. In return, he offers to join their group until they leave the ruins, and Lapis agrees, saying she will rely on them." Ritz thanked him gratefully and confirmed that now they would work together. Rorin cautiously agreed. Ritz announced that it was time to continue the search for the exit. Rorin thought that he really wished nothing bad would happen, and that they would get to the surface alive, but his heart whispered to him that such an outcome was not to be relied upon. Lapis inquired of Mr. Rorin about the condition of the shoulder injury after one of the previous skirmishes, and Rorin assured that the pain and discomfort no longer bothered him. He was given a special healing potion, and the wounded area was carefully bandaged. Lapis was not entirely satisfied and warned that if his condition worsened, he must immediately inform her. She has 2 spells in reserve, and one of them she specifically saved for his treatment. Rorin mentally noted that Lapis told everyone that she had only 1 divine spell left, so she deliberately lied out of caution. He did not know how to take the fact that Lapis lied. They had agreed to be honest. But he decided, until they get out, they would have to share the same fate with the Silver Rank group. Chak admitted that Thai's ruins seemed very strange to him, because as far as he knew, in unexplored places of the ancient civilization among enemies, there were usually only undead creatures, golems or representatives of the undead. But he said that none of those enemies appeared in these ruins, and it seemed suspicious to him. Rory noted that such a situation only made their task easier. Chuck, in turn, said that if anyone did appear, it would definitely be later. So far they had only encountered goblins, and Lapis suggested that those goblins might have come from outside, possibly through other cracks similar to the one their group had crawled through. Shaq recalled that until recently the entrance to the ruins had been tightly sealed, and only a few days ago it was opened by a group of mages hired by the man who found those ruins. He added that only a few mages managed to remove the powerful seal, and since the entrance was so securely protected, there must have been some guardian or keeper inside. Instead, they found only traces of goblins. Colt assumed that perhaps the defenders died of old age or perished in battle with goblins. After all, so much time had passed. He noted that in such a place there should at least be some remains, but apart from goblins they found nothing. Colts also added that if these ruins were truly inhabited by spirits, as is the case with the undead, everything would look completely different. You reminded everyone that each ruin has its own peculiarities and suggested thinking about what exactly they might have been used for. Rorin mentally admitted that these ruins were indeed too confusing. Chak suggested postponing their goal for later and focusing on something more practical, getting out of here. Ritz reported that goblins were spotted ahead again. Roran asked Lapis to come down. Nim confidently replied that she could handle it without problems and advised everyone to beware of possible attacks from the rear. Roran nodded and confirmed that he understood the order. Ritz noted that there are only 7 goblins, so they have a numerical advantage, and Colt suggested backing up with magic if needed. Nim refused, saying that they would manage on their own. The group of adventurers successfully destroyed all the goblins. After the battle, Chuck breathed a sigh of relief. Roran was genuinely impressed by the skill of his temporary allies. Ritz calmly replied that there was nothing to boast about. They were only silver rank. Roran admitted with regret that he seemed to have been rude again. He mentally noted that although they were all adventurers, there was a huge difference between him and this group. Ritz reminded Ruin that he was here to exterminate monsters and added that even if they failed to destroy their lair, they would still be rewarded for the defeated goblins. Just need to bring their ears as proof, and Ruin asked if he was sure about that. Ritz confirmed that it made no sense for their group, so the ears could be given to Rorin. Nim remarked that Ritz was usually stingy and reluctant to share. Chuck joked that now Rorin would have a chance to boast in front of other adventurers. Nim sarcastically said that the sky would probably fall tomorrow if Ritz really told something. Ritz, annoyed, asked them to stop babbling and explained that he was just worried about the less experienced comrades. Lapis suggested collecting goblin ears, saying it might come in handy someday. Rorin agreed with her proposal. He mentally realized he had taken too many ears. The sack was soaked with blood and started to stink. Chuck added that there seemed to be no end to the goblins. Ritz handed Rohan a few more ears. Rohan thanked him but said that, in his opinion, he already had more than enough, and noticed that the others apparently did not notice the smell at all. Lapis sharply said that she did not care, but the stench made it impossible for her to breathe through her nose. Loren noted that this did not need to be said out loud. It was obvious anyway. Suddenly Nim froze and said she smelled a strange odor, explaining that the air had changed. Instead of the smell of goblins, there was now the smell of blood. Chuck added that the smell they were talking about was not coming from here, but from the other side of the ruins, so they needed to move on. Lapis pondered whether it was even possible to distinguish human blood from goblin blood if both smelled like rust. Ritz noticed that Nim's sight, hearing, and smell were much sharper than theirs. Chuck jokingly said that she had a character as sharp as a needle. Nim hit him in response. Ritz told them to stop doing stupid things, and Chuck tried to justify himself. Everyone was tense. Maybe they should relax a bit. Ritz ordered them to move more carefully and asked if the young lady could continue. Lapis apologized and said she needed a little more time. Ritz said it did not matter how long they had known each other. She better return to the temple as soon as the opportunity arose. Rorin replied that it was her decision, and he had no influence in this matter. Suddenly, Chuck called the others and pointed at something terrible. Nim noticed that the leather armor was soaked with blood. Ritz noticed how much blood was around and added that it was still bright red, so it couldn't be old. The cult claimed that their rivals went into those ruins and hinted that maybe they ended up there too. And among them was someone in leather armor. Nim grumbled irritably that Ritz and Chuck were acting too recklessly, and Colt's like an idiot. Colts shouted that he was not an idiot. Nim said she wanted to hear Rowan's opinion, and he looked at her in surprise. Why didn't she ask the comrades? Nim explained that they could guess for themselves, but she really wanted to know what he thought about the owner of that armor. Seeing so much blood, Rohan thought that the owner was most likely dead. Maybe he was torn apart right here. Nim stated that the armor belonged to their rival, a female thief named Vora. Lapis reminded that in these ruins they had only met goblins so far, and the one they found was a woman, and Nim asked her what she thought about it. Lapis said it was very strange. If the armor belonged to a woman and she was killed by goblins, then that was unusual. Ordinary goblins don't behave like that. Nim agreed, and added that there must be something else hiding in these ruins, not just goblins. Lapis noted that in these ruins they had only encountered goblins so far, and emphasized that ordinary goblins usually don't kill women. They know what to do with them if they catch them. She realized, if that armor really belonged to a woman and she was still killed, then something was definitely wrong with these goblins. She added that if the victim remained alive, ordinary goblins would first think to have fun and then drag her to their nest. Ruarid understood that in these ruins, probably not only goblins live, and decided that this is how one should think now, while Nim approached Rorin, reminded him about the hole through which they got into the ruins, and asked if he remembered its location. Rorin replied that the road actually goes only one way, so it's easier to navigate here. Nim thought a little, agreed, and told Ritz that she felt something strange in this area, so it was better to go to the surface and regroup. Ritz asked for a moment and explained that he understands. Something is wrong with the ruins, but one bloody piece of armor is by no means a reason to retreat. He sharply noted that they need a much more significant reason to retreat. Returning just for one item of equipment seems unconvincing, so Chuck suggested at least trying to find enemy tokens to have a reason to come back. Ritz agreed with the idea and decisively ordered them to be extremely vigilant, added that returning is currently impossible, and that it was clear from the very beginning. This is not a simple matter, and also said that if they really find those opponent tokens Chuck talked about, then they could discuss another option. Nem agreed with the stated position. Ritz ordered to move forward and be fully prepared. Lapis approached Loren and called him by name. Loren asked if she was already feeling better. Lapis confirmed that she felt better and thanked him for the help. Ritz asked if she would be able to walk normally again. Lapis replied that she feels quite well and added that she liked sitting on Mr. Loren's back so much that she would even want to continue, but understands that she should not burden him further. Ritz inquisitively asked if there were any special relations between them. Rorin instantly replied no. They have no such relations, and Lapis smiled and added that they are working on it. Chuck exclaimed excitedly that Roran managed to win the heart of a real beauty and that he is great. Nim hit Chuck and sharply said that if he intends to attract attention to himself, let him do it alone. Chuck sarcastically said that most likely he will first die at Nim's hands, and then from the claws of some monster. Ritz turned to Roaring and asked if he would participate in the fight, then ordered him to watch the rear and added that a young girl would go with him. Lapis said that they can be relied upon and added that, in her opinion, it was a tough test for Roaring. She noted that they were entrusted to explore the ruins of an ancient civilization and reminded that such matters are usually not entrusted to copper-rank adventurers, and Roarin reminded her that she must understand the situation they are currently in. Lapis admitted that she is really scared. Roarin replied that this is too much and asked her to leave. He mentally noted that no one nearby was paying attention to her behavior, and said that he understood her enthusiasm but asked her to hold back a little. Lapis agreed and moved on to the next question, asking what their goal was now. Nim explained. The main thing is to explore the ruins, but they cannot ignore attempts to find out what happened to the competitors. Both were priorities. Lapis nodded and suggested returning to the same hole through which they fell, and Ritz asked for an explanation of why this was necessary. Lapis assumed that the pit was a trap to catch outsiders, and since it was not deadly, probably the entire level served the same purpose. She suggested that the monsters were left there deliberately to deal with intruders, and added that although this mechanism was complex, at different times and in different countries, they always knew how to deal with fools who invade others' territory. She proposed to postpone such delicate topics for now, and said that there was nothing truly important on this level. She believed there was no point in exploring it if their real goal was the ruins themselves, and Ritz asked why they needed to return to the same pit. Lapis replied that she felt there was a hidden passage for servicing the trap, where everyone who fell gathered, and perhaps that was the way up. Nim said it was worth considering, especially since there were no other ideas. Chuck recalled that he had noticed nothing suspicious then, but added that if the trap was really not deadly, the exit was most likely well camouflaged and he simply did not notice it. Ritz smiled and reminded them that it was Chuck. And Chuck sighed, admitted there was no point arguing, and agreed to return to examine the place where they fell. Colts, looking at the map he had drawn himself, showed where they should go. Later he reported that they had arrived at the place. Rorin noticed that the ceiling in this room was incredibly high, and suggested that the pit closed like a lid, because at first glance there was nothing remarkable here, and he asked in surprise if there really was a passage leading upward from here. Chuck confirmed his doubts and added that he was a silver-rank thief. If something was hidden, he would definitely notice it. At that moment the passage suddenly opened. Moran asked with surprise what Lapis had done. She explained that the control panel was hidden among the mana materials. It was really hard to notice. Chuck reproachfully reminded him that his senior comrades should have noticed such a small detail. Colts called Chuck a fool and added that the thief at least should have noticed the trap itself in advance. Rorin admitted he did not fully understand such subtleties at all. Nim quietly whispered that there were stairs before them. Ritz confirmed this and suggested everyone go up. Nim turned to the rest and with a determined look let them know he was ready to go further. Chuck carefully examined the sturdy ladder and decided it was safe to climb. He said he would go up first and thought, even if a monster met him at the top, there was a chance he would hold on and not fall. Chuck's arguments and the sense of seriousness of the situation hardened in her the determination to go to the end, as if on a last journey, and pushed him to fight. Chuck, somewhat doubting, awkwardly asked if Nim was confusing something about what was happening. Rorin, watching their conversation, felt as if everything they had done was in vain. Their efforts had brought no results. Lapis, having gone over everything that had happened in his head, understood. If these people had found the way back and managed to climb up, their paths would hardly have crossed, and this could be called luck. Chak reported that everything was calm above, no soul, and suggested that the others climb up one by one and ask who would dare to follow them. Lapis, assessing the situation, suggested waiting a bit, while Rorin, not sharing her optimism, insisted on caution, and said it was too early to rejoice. He reminded them that most likely after the ascent they would be ordered to return. They would end up on the same level from which Ritz and the others once fell, so they already had an idea of the possible way out. Lapis admitted that she had not considered such a turn of events, and it hurt her deeply. She had a unique chance to explore the mysterious ruins, but to take advantage of it, she would have to climb up. Lapis added that perhaps there really was nothing important left on this level, and Rorin honestly admitted to himself, more than anything, he wanted to immediately escape from these dangerous ruins, but duty and circumstances kept him here. Roar paused for a moment, then aloud listed how they could help in this situation. Lapis thought a little and replied that, apart from divine spells, it was very difficult to answer. Ritz admitted that climbing up was difficult. Lapis added that as soon as he suddenly said he could use magic, it might arouse suspicion, and Rorin suggested thinking about what knowledge or skills could come in handy. Lapis said that if she managed to understand what this place was, she would at least draw a rough map of the surroundings. He was noticeably surprised and sincerely admired how she did it. Lapis enthusiastically explained that all guild buildings, wherever a person in the world might go, are almost identical in architecture. Of course, there are differences due to the builder's own decisions, but generally guild structures are built according to one scheme. She noticed that the same rule applies to ancient ruins. Former civilizations built structures for specific purposes and repeated the same architectural schemes, and Rorin became interested in possible exceptions to this rule. Lapis admitted that, as in any system, there are exceptions here too. Sometimes you come across truly unusual ruins that are completely different from typical structures. At that moment, Ritz had already started speaking when suddenly Chuck jumped down and announced that the situation had sharply worsened. He shouted to everyone that goblins were attacking and urgently urged others to jump immediately. Rowan, trying to understand what was happening, spoke about it with concern. Nim, in horror, exclaimed that they were still looking at the same ruins and could not understand how so many goblins could have been hiding here unnoticed all this time. Ritz admitted that he himself did not know what was happening, and said that the goblins appeared suddenly, as if from nowhere. He could not understand what kind of attack this was. Chuck, not hiding his fear, said that he did not want to die at the hands of goblins. Nim took matters into her own hands and ordered him to shut up and run, explaining that now they had no other choice but to flee. Rorin thought in despair that they were again in a very dangerous situation, and reckoned that with such a number of enemies, one wrong turn could lead to their getting lost, after which the goblin horde would instantly catch up with them. This would lead to an inevitable end, and it seemed to him that this was completely unfair. Colts barely uttered that he could no longer move. Lapis added that her strength was also gone. Nim shouted anxiously to Colts and Lapis, hoping they were okay, and Chuck warned them not to stop. Stopping could cost them their lives. Rory mentally noted that his comrades were completely exhausted and worried. Had Lapis managed to restore enough mana for them to keep running for a long time? He approached them, lifted both, Colts and Lapis, into his arms and started running without slowing down. Chuck asked him how he felt, and Ron replied anxiously that he was used to this. For a mercenary, carrying wounded comrades was usual, although he admitted that he had hardly slept in the last few days. He thought to himself, this is really very difficult. Colts, barely able to speak, apologized to Rorin and promised that he would definitely repay him for the help. Lapis, barely breathing, apologized for causing him trouble again. Rorin said that instead of wasting their last strength on running, it would be better to think about how to get out of this mess with minimal losses. He emphasized that if they got tired, they would be captured. Lapis approaches Colts and suggests arranging a mass destruction with a fireball. Colts, assessing the situation, said that again, when there are so many opponents, this spell would be just a drop in the ocean and he could not advise using it. Lapis suggested building a stone wall to hold back the enemies, and Colts shook his head. It was unlikely to block the entire passage, but he would try. Although he warned that there were too many enemies, and the wall would not hold them for long. Lapis proposed using Firestorm. Colts said he could use it only twice and doubted whether that would be enough, and Lapis agreed that it was not, but still enthusiastically praised him, calling him a true master of magic. The Colts responded, noting that Lady Lapis also understood magic well. Rorin suddenly interrupted their conversation and ordered them to stop the pointless chatter, while inwardly hoping that they would somehow find a way out to escape the looming threat. Rorin returned to the others and said hopefully that someone among them already had an idea how to get out of this situation. Lapis shook his head. Unfortunately, they lacked both physical strength and means to effectively fight such a huge number of goblins, so there was no question of a fight. Chuck shouted in despair that if that happened, they would all simply be eaten. Lapis said in horror that she and Lady Nim would most likely be captured and used for reproduction, and Colts grimly added that the woman from the other group was probably killed and then eaten, which confirmed her fears. Ritz sharply expressed his dissatisfaction, reminding the others that they needed to keep calm and at least some dignity. As the current critical situation demanded, Nim said in a weak voice that she was getting worse, and it was already clear that she would not last long. Chuck offered help. He would carry it himself if it would save even a little time and increase the chances of rescue. Nim thanked him and said that if everything really went very badly, she would rely on him completely. Chuck, looking at her, admitted that everything happening had already become really bad. Warren's mind was raging with a desperate desire to find at least some emergency exit, and he concluded that the rescue might be hidden in the stairs from which they started their path. He realized there was no clear exit, everyone's strength was fading, and at any moment someone could lose touch with reality. He reasoned that if they just kept running without a plan, they would almost certainly die. And although he was not entirely sure about his proposal, doing nothing was clearly worse. Rorin admitted aloud that he could not say for sure where exactly the exit was, but still had a few specific suggestions and reminded everyone of the road they had run earlier. Ritz tried to recall the route, but realized he had forgotten the way and thought that maybe Chuck should remember it. He asked himself if they would manage to return to the hatch from which the goblins poured out. Chuck noted that they could not return the same way. They would have to look for other passages, and then asked what Ron planned to do when he got there. Roar confidently said that if so many goblins had come down from there, then upstairs there was probably almost no one left. He thought that the whole crowd had jumped down, and they would not return the same way. And since they would have to climb the ladder, the enemies would not be able to attack all at once. Chuck noticed that the goblins were not stupid enough to just wait until they started climbing, and realized if they were driven into a narrow passage, it would be the end. Rorin asked if the stallions could use magic to buy some time. Focusing, the colts decided to try to burn the opponents ahead with a firestorm, and then block the way with a stone wall. He said he was ready and could be relied upon. Ritz, having listened to him, snorted. It is unlikely that this will stop such a crowd at all. Rorin confidently stated that as long as the stone wall does not fall, they will be able to climb up. And if they do not make it in time, he himself will become their shield, since it was his idea. Ritz was surprised and objected, doubting that Rowan could single-handedly resist such gigantic opponents. Rowan said that the firestorm in the stone wall would already create a barrier and, in his opinion, there would not be many enemies at once. So he called on others to stand up as soon as possible to prevent the worst. Ritz agreed and told Chuck to lead everyone to that very hole. Chuck confirmed and pointed in the direction they needed to go. Ritz seriously warned Colts, "Start preparing to use magic." Colts replied that he was ready. Ritz clearly said, "As soon as we reach the place, Chuck will go up first, reinforcements will follow him, and Ritz himself, as the group leader, will stay to cover the others." Rorin, hearing this, calmly said that he was glad for such recognition, but he himself would carry it out. Ritz objected. Lauren would be too slow because of his things. By the time he climbs up, the goblins will have time to tear him apart, and he added that he himself, if someone covers him from above, could quickly jump up. Rorin reminded him that being an adventurer was still new to him, but he once served as a mercenary, and added that he was tired of someone constantly covering him on the battlefield, so let him be relied upon. Chuck said that no one else had fallen from that pit. Ritz took this as a good sign and urged everyone to climb up as quickly as possible because the goblins were already catching up with them and gave Colts the order to use magic. Colts began the spell, summoned a fierce whirl of flame, directed a firestorm, and then a huge stone wall grew from the ground. Ritz gave the order that we must descend right now. Roar mentally noted that this is exactly how a silver rank mage acts. Quickly, powerfully, and precisely. Ritz, observing what was happening, sighed irritably. The goblin's actions seemed completely clumsy to him. Rowan thoughtfully remarked that although the magic lasted briefly, the flame was so strong it left heat behind. He added that goblins are usually not considered intelligent, but he had never seen them pursue prey so fiercely before. Ritz, realizing there was no more time for talk, shouted to Roran, "Stop arguing and get up immediately!" Meanwhile, the goblins broke through the stone wall. Roran, stay downstairs and join the fight to hold them back. Ritz raised his eyes and shouted to Colts to move faster. Colts, clenching his jaw with concentration, replied that he was already trying. Roran suddenly realized he would not be able to avoid the fight. Chuck looked around and noticed there was not a single enemy nearby. He reached out his hand to Nim, helped her get up, and was glad to see it worked. Nim, barely smiling, thanked Chuck for the help. Chuck tried to encourage her. "Don't worry, we're moving out now." Roran, raising his eyes, exclaimed why the others had not climbed out yet. After all, time was against them. Ritz, trying to stay calm, replied that it was very close and they had almost reached it. Nim, noticing Chuck, shouted to him and showed where he was standing. Chuck nervously flinched at her words and reported that the goblins were approaching again. He turned to Lapis, asking for Ritz's help, and asked Colts if the magic was ready. Colts, gasping, said he only had one chance left to use magic, and Chuck suggested staying to hold off the goblins while Ritz and Roran reached the upper level. Roran, fending off enemies, mentally noted that he was killing goblins one by one, but their number did not decrease. He tried not to slip in the puddles of blood and not to fall, stumbling over corpses. But he was alarmed by a strange thing. There were far fewer corpses on the ground than there should have been. When the goblins poured down from above, they pressed and crushed each other in the crowd, and many should have died. But when he arrived at this place, there were almost no bodies left. He began to wonder what this could mean. Perhaps the goblins were taking the bodies of their fallen comrades, but for what purpose remained unclear. Lapis loudly called out to Mr. Rowan to get his attention, and he asked if everyone managed to get up there. Lapis replied that everyone was in place but warned that there were also goblins, several of them, and they seemed strange to her. She added that the group is holding off the attack for now. But it is getting worse by the minute, and soon they could be cornered from both sides. Lauren, hearing this, reacted sharply and irritably said that goblins appear everywhere, as if someone is deliberately calling them here. He realized that he must reach the summit as soon as possible, otherwise it would be too late. Having risen to the level of the others, he instantly destroyed what they were climbing on. Rorin asked what the situation was there and what was happening in general. Lapis replied, "Chuck is wounded. Ritz is fighting the enemy." But suddenly she noticed Nim's condition, and her heart tightened with anxiety. Rorin quietly wondered who the black goblin he had seen was. Nim, concentrating his thoughts, noticed that the enemy was not afraid at all, and this troubled him. Lauren hit the goblin and thereby saved Nim from the attack. He thought that he would have long since dealt with an ordinary goblin, but this one is different. His skin was so tough that it was hard to believe. Nim took advantage of the moment and hit the goblin right in the eyes. Rorin thought that although the skin was tough, the eyes were much more vulnerable. He said that if he could not kill him with one blow, he would hit him again and again until he fell. Lapis warned that another goblin appeared from the other side. Ritz screamed in pain as the enemy grabbed him and crushed his bones. Ron turned to Colts and asked how his magic was. Colts admitted that his magical powers were completely exhausted and that he would not be able to use even simple spells for some time. Then Rorin lunged at the second goblin to save Ritz. Together they managed to destroy their opponents. Colts, gasping for breath, said that the black goblins appeared suddenly. Arrows did not affect them. Chuck was wounded while trying to protect Nim, and Ritz said that it was then he managed to climb up. Nim, with anxiety in her voice, apologized to Chuck, thinking it was her fault, but Chuck interrupted her. "Don't be so modest. It doesn't suit you," and added that it was more important now to take care of the uterus. Rorin asked Lapis if she had discovered anything important. She replied that she had a premonition, but if it was true, then it was much more serious than it seemed. She believed that they had found themselves in extremely dangerous and sinister ruins. Rorin repeated her words. She confirmed that it was exactly such disgusting ruins. Lapis asked Mr. Ritz to allow her to check something. Rorin was surprised and asked if she wanted to stay here. Lapis shook her head but said that these ruins needed to be explored. If left active, it could end in disaster. However, first they needed to leave this area immediately. Otherwise they would be attacked again. Ritz agreed with her and said directly that he did not want to encounter those black goblins again. Lapis suggested casting a spell. Chuck responded calmly, saying it was not necessary. The medicine had already worked. He explained that his head was just a little dizzy from the blow, and Lapis advised him to definitely see a doctor after returning, because head injuries could be dangerous. Chuck agreed and promised to heed her advice as soon as they returned. Ritz asked if Chuck would be able to walk on his own. Chuck challenged him, saying it was nonsense to ask that, just give the order if he needed to move. Nim intervened and gently noted that it was not worth doing everything by force, and Chuck confidently replied that he was fine and there was no need to worry, adding that he was hit on the head and lost consciousness for a moment, but now he could move normally. Colt admitted that he was in a worse position. He had exhausted all his magical energy and could no longer fight, and Chuck noted that no one blamed him for that. Ritz agreed. If Colts had not destroyed that black goblin, the consequences could have been unpredictable. He thanked him and suggested leaving this place as soon as possible. Rorin watched Lapis, and it seemed to him that he was moving as if he knew exactly where to go. He turned to Lapis and asked what kind of creatures they were. They had very tough skin and strong bones, and Rorin wondered if this was a higher race of goblins. Lapis suggested that they might be creatures similar to hobgoblins, but they were even larger in size. Rorin disagreed. Simply growing taller would not explain this change. Lapis turned to him and asked if he had noticed anything else strange. Rorin recalled seeing those goblins gathering the bodies of their dead relatives and doubted that they did it for food. He was alarmed by this behavior of the local goblins. It was clearly different from the usual, and there were too many of them. Lapis agreed with his observation and confirmed that these goblins were indeed unusual. Rorin added that, in his opinion, such people could only be found in these ruins. Lapis suddenly changed her tone and unexpectedly asked if he was interested in pharmacy and alchemy. And Rorin replied that he had heard these words, but none of his acquaintances were interested in these sciences. Lapis said it was enough if he simply knew about their existence. She explained that pharmacists and alchemists experiment on living creatures. Rorin noted that new medicines are usually tested on laboratory rats. Lapis asked if he knew why rats are used for such experiments. Rorin grimly said that such information is hardly available to an ordinary mercenary. According to Lapis, the reason is quite banal. Rats grow quickly, reproduce rapidly, and have many offspring, so they are convenient to use in research. Rorin felt the same traits: rapid reproduction, fast growth, and numerous offspring, and said that this very much resembled goblins. Lapis confidently confirmed her opinion and suggested that before them might be a real laboratory where experiments were conducted specifically on goblins. Lapis explained that goblins are easy to raise. They are undemanding and do not require special conditions. She emphasized that their use in experiments did not cause remorse because goblins were quite primitive and at the same time had traits similar to humans. In her eyes, goblins were ideal test subjects. She rhetorically asked if there were better creatures for experiments, but clearly implied that there simply were none. And judging by how goblins were used here, Lapis realized this was a real laboratory. Rorin repeated the word laboratory, and with surprise noticed their simplicity. Lapis added that goblins are truly incredibly omnivorous. They eat literally everything, from garbage and junk to dead bodies. According to records of the ancient civilization, goblins reduced waste by as much as 80%. And that alone was astonishing, and Rorin agreed that goblins are indeed very undemanding. Lapis continued to reason, reminding that for representatives of the ancient civilization, no matter how many goblins there were, they were always just trash, and she noted that during reproduction, different species began to appear among them, apparently as a result of experiments. Rorin was thoughtfully pondering whether those different species were the same ones they had already encountered. Lapis confirmed that these ancient ruins were indeed a breeding nest for goblins, and at that very moment, a new wave of goblins descended upon the group. Lapis said that it was worse than simple breeding, because here goblins were not just bred, they were subjected to much deeper manipulation. Rorin was confused. He could not understand what she was talking about at all. Lapis returned to the conversation and explained that this was not a simple farm, but a place where deliberate changes were made and possibly processes related to evolution took place. Rorin asked her to explain what she meant. Lapis simply replied that, in simplified terms, the essence was that they were studying ways to make goblins stronger, and added that numerous goblins were chasing them, but among them there was no evolutionary form, and this greatly alarmed her. She suggested that these goblins here were deliberately modified so that they would not produce higher forms, neither hobgoblins nor goblin mages. The researchers consciously excluded any possibility of their appearance, because they considered it pointless. Rorin was worried about their size. The goblins they saw were very large, but Lapis calmly noted that even bigger ones were still just goblins. The guests growled that the goblins they met outside had broken through the cracks, and among them there was even a goblin mage. Lapis clarified that inside the ruins the goblins' capacity for change was limited, but as soon as they went outside, transformations began. She added that she believed the ruins had been dormant for a long time, but at some point they were rebooted. The cause could have been either someone from outside who activated the system, or an open passage that pushed the processes toward restoration. Rorin wanted to know why it would be bad to leave everything as it was. Lapis explained that those large black goblins were improved versions created in that laboratory. But more than anything, she was frightened by their behavior. Rorin asked what exactly troubled her. Lapis continued the conversation and suggested that goblins here did not need to reproduce in the usual way. She suggested that somewhere in the ruins there was a device created specifically for growing new creatures, and it was most likely there that goblins were born. So raising offspring naturally made no sense, and captured female adventurers were simply killed. However, she recalled with horror one disturbing episode. A goblin attacked Mrs. Nim and tried to tear off her clothes. Lapis insisted that this could not be explained by reproductive instinct at all. She suggested that this goblin might be a hybrid, with human features. Perhaps it is a result of crossbreeding and related to one of Mr. Ritz's rivals and his group. Lauren, hearing this, indignantly said that then that creature cannot be called a goblin, but Lapis objected, saying that at the core it is still a goblin. Even if the mother was human, no one would say such creatures are half-goblins, because although they have a human element, they remain goblins. The scariest thing was that goblins were being grown and improved here. The local specimens had intelligence at the level of humans and could learn, and Rorin fell silent, realizing what he had heard. Lapis continued and reminded that they had already discussed the strange behavior of goblins who gathered the bodies of their fallen comrades. She suggested that these bodies probably served as material for creating new specimens, and from the bodies of more experienced goblins, even stronger ones could be obtained. And if this process repeated again and again in a closed cycle, eventually a goblin might appear stronger even than a dragon. Such a goblin would have not only physical strength but also broad knowledge and great combat experience, so, considering all this, Lapis posed an almost rhetorical question. What, in Rorin's opinion, could happen in such a case? Rorin, without hesitation, asked how to disable those ruins, and Lapis admitted that she no longer had an answer to that. And inside, Rorin spread disappointment. He realized he had placed too much hope on her, sincerely believing that she knew how to stop the ruins. Lapis added that all ruins are different from each other, so there is no single general way to disable them, and not at all due to a lack of knowledge on her part. Rorin, a little stunned, quietly muttered something, trying to explain how he felt. Lapis noticed his reaction and said she did not like the expression on his face, and Rorin froze, imagining how he must have looked at that moment, and had no idea where exactly they were going next. Lapis said that they would first go to the private rooms that once belonged to the inhabitants of the ancient civilization. She thought that some of the furniture might have belonged to rulers, so there might be clues or documents there explaining what was happening. Rorin was surprised to hear this. Could people really have lived here? Lapis explained that there is teleportation magic that can connect cities and research centers. However, its activation required a huge amount of magical energy, and she doubted whether it was worth spending such resources at all. Rorin admitted he was not sure if the effort was worth it. Lapis added that if the ancients really used teleportation, they most likely created a full-fledged residential complex where one could stay for a long time. Rorin doubted, but Lapis decisively said that living quarters had to exist. Researchers and other staff could live there, so she was going to look for materials there to find a way to disable the ruins, and if something useful was found among the discoveries, she would gladly take it for herself. Roar strictly warned her not to make so many bold statements, especially about theft, and Lapis cut in that all the owners of this place had been dead for centuries, so the concept of theft here did not matter. Rorin shrugged and said that in that case, it was worth gathering everything that had any value. Lapis agreed and clarified that she would do exactly that, because she believed, if this place was ever disabled, it was done by an ancient civilization, and it was quite possible that all the records about these ruins were not collected in one place. Rorin asked what to do in that case. Lapis briefly replied that she did not know what to do if that was really the case. Rorin mentally noted that the situation was still difficult. They could run into goblins again at any moment. Chuck was wounded. Colts had completely used up his magic reserves and could no longer fight. Ritz and Nim were still strong, but Rorin himself felt exhaustion creeping up on him. He worriedly noted that his weapon was almost at its limit. If he dealt with 2 or 3 more goblins, it would most likely break. Lapis, hearing this, became concerned and advised him to think about a replacement. Rohan admitted that he would decide later, when the weapon was finally out of order, and now it was more important to obtain information. Lapis supported him, saying that information was indeed important. Finally, they reached the dwelling. She announced with a sneer that now they would start rob. Rorin became alert and asked if it was safe. There could be traps there, and Lapis smiled and assured that she knew a bit about such ruins, so there was nothing to worry about. Ritz asked uncertainly if that was acceptable. Lapis opened one of the rooms, examined it, and, sighing disappointedly, said that there was nothing useful there, so she suggested moving on to the next one. Rorin, looking at her, said that she was doing better than others, so she could be relied upon. Nim quietly looked around the room and noticed that they were in the homes of representatives of an ancient civilization. Ritz added that everything around was the legacy of these people, so he suggested simply taking what they found and leaving, because their task was to check the ruins, and the information obtained seemed sufficient. Lapis did not object and said that no one would stop them from returning, and Ritz suggested going together. The group itself did not really understand what they were dealing with, so this information needed to be passed to the leadership so they could decide for themselves. Lapis quietly chuckled and noted that they would have to summon people of the golden and mithril ranks. Gathering them would not be easy. Ritz understood mentally. Only a few hundred people of the golden rank in the whole world. Only a few dozen of the mithril rank and fewer than 10 holders of the highest, crimson gold, so this was truly a difficult matter. Lapis said that if they decided to go, she would not stop them. She promised to pray for their safety, but nothing good awaited them in these ruins. Roar noticed that her words sounded harsh, and Lapis quietly explained that no one can be forced to go with you. Ron laughed and asked if that meant he should follow her. Lapis was a little confused and asked if he really would not go, and Rorin replied that now they were in the same boat and he could not leave. Lapis sighed with relief and admitted that she would not have managed without him. She thanked him and said she had good news. Rorin asked him to tell her what the news was. Lapis happily exclaimed that she managed to find records about these ruins, and they even had how to disable it. Rorin looked at her abilities in amazement and exclaimed that she could read the ancient language. Lapis proudly reminded her that she was a priestess of the god of knowledge. Rowan smiled and asked if all the priestesses of this god were so clever. Lapis replied that the world is full of intelligent people, but those like her are special. Rowan got down to business and asked what to do next. Lapis explained that she thought there should be some kind of control room there. She found a panel that could shut down all processes and suggested going there immediately. Ritz overheard the conversation and asked if they had really found something. Lapis confirmed and said they were lucky. Then she turned to Mr. Ritz and asked what decision he would make. Ritz decisively replied that they would go together. Chuck added that this way their chances of survival would be better. Lapis, hearing this, agreed and suggested hurrying to the control room, saying that as soon as they get there, they will be able to put an end to everything that is happening. One of the men suddenly remembered a moment from his past when he, still a complete novice, first came to the guild. It was on that same day and at the same branch that another man named Ritz also registered. He and Ritz set off at the same time, but hardly crossed paths or communicated. Still, Ritz's name accidentally reached him and stayed in his memory. Over time, Ritz became the person everyone was always talking about, and the man, though unwilling, heard these rumors. Perhaps Ritz was valued more, or maybe something important happened during some research case. One way or another, their paths diverged, although they started the same. Ritz moved forward faster, became silver rank before him, and he had to admit it. Ritz became his eternal rival. Comrades, noticing his pensiveness, began to tease him, mocking his thoughts about Mr. Ritz and laughing at the phrase he heard about him, though he did not want to, when the man suddenly ordered them to be silent. He admitted to himself that he was grateful for this unexpected opportunity to prove something not only to others but also to himself. Later, one of the girls from the administration explained that they needed to survey the ruins near the village vineyard, and to speed up the process, they decided to assign the task to 2 silver rank groups at once. She added that they would pay depending on the quantity and quality of the information they received, and the man mentally noted that this was a great opportunity to find out which of the 2 was better. When Ritz introduced himself as the leader of his group, the man reacted instantly. He was irritated by Ritz's confident and calm tone, and he realized he had to prove himself no less. Inside, he was already preparing to respond with something worthy, not to give in. One of the girls on his team, sincerely rejoicing, loudly exclaimed that the real Mr. Ritz himself was standing before them. She was glad to meet him. Another comrade remarked that it was an incredible coincidence. The same girl immediately turned to Nim and enthusiastically praised her beauty, saying that all elves are beautiful. Chuck, who was standing nearby, commented on her words, noting that the girl was called beautiful. Another team member said he had heard about Mr. Coltz's skillful magic. Ritz, frowning slightly, sharply demanded explanations. He needed to understand how they knew all this. His comrades admitted that rumors about Ritz's group were spreading everywhere, and added that their leader was a true fan of Ritz. The man irritably tried to justify himself. He categorically refused to admit that he was a fan, saying he just remembered that they started at the same time. He reminded that he had already declared Ritz his opponent in this mission, and then added that since there is already a chance to talk, it is not worth missing the opportunity to get acquainted. He loudly told Ritz that they became adventurers on the same day, and that since then Ritz has been ahead. The man admitted that he admires him a little, so he throws down the gauntlet. If their group turns out to be better at exploring the ruins, Ritz will definitely remember his name, as the name of his rival. Then he called his comrades and led them forward. One of his men asked if he was going to introduce himself properly. Someone else noticed that Ritz looked truly impressed. The man spoke quietly, wondering if he could pass by them. The comrades answered confidently that they would definitely win, promised that the moment would come when the enemy would recognize him. One of them said they would be there on that very day, and the man loudly declared that victory would be theirs. Chuck, who observed everything, quietly repeated the word rivals. Ritz nodded in response, and when the opponents left, his team began to discuss how to respond to the challenge and decided. In the ruins, the most important thing is speed and quality of work. Whoever does the best will receive not only a greater reward but also recognition. And essentially the conditions have not changed. Ritz thought aloud. Maybe it's worth finding out the name of the one who challenged him. Later, when everything changed, Nim sadly suggested trying to find the tokens of that group so that, if necessary, at least they could be buried. Lapis said that they finally received instructions regarding the construction of these ruins, so it is time to act without any delay. She insisted that everyone hurry. The sooner they reached the so-called control room, the sooner they could put an end to what was happening around them. But she said that the person who used to be the administrator of this establishment turned out to be a decent, responsible, and sensible person. He left no strange secrets and no locks with incomprehensible activation conditions. Lapis added that if he had been different, more secretive and insidious, she would have had to wonder who he really was and how to extract the whole truth from him. Rorin, without saying the word, thought with surprise how Lapis managed to learn so many details about the structure and purpose of these ruins. He understood. It was really interesting, but something inside hinted that the answer might not please him, so he decided not to ask unnecessary questions. However, Lapis, as if reading his mood, calmly said that she had read all this information in books. Ritz looked around and reminded everyone that no one knew when the goblins would appear again, openly grumbled about how tired he was of this dirty and disgusting work, and Rorin could not help but agree. He thought to himself that they were sent on an ordinary routine reconnaissance, but instead they stumbled upon such truly disgusting ruins that everything turned out to be much more dangerous than anyone could have expected. Lapis looked at Loren and guessed that he probably considered their group unlucky for getting lost in these ruins. Rorin, surprised by the accuracy of her guess, asked in response if she could read minds, and Lapis smiled and replied that everything was written plainly on Mr. Rorin's face, so he definitely could use being more careful with his facial expressions. She added that probably the worst fate befell not them, but Mr. Ritz's competitors, and Rorin reluctantly agreed, nodding as if admitting that this might be true. Lapis sharply ordered them to stop chatting. They were already at the place, so she invited everyone inside. Lauren looked around and noticed how surprisingly simple everything looked. Lapis warned that it was too early to rejoice. There was still one important task ahead. She pointed to the panel and said that before them was the control console from which the entire structure of the ruins could be controlled. Rorin inquired whether she would be able to figure out the device. Lapis confidently nodded and said that of course she would manage. And at that very moment, Chuck loudly noticed that the doors had slid open. Lapis, with the same confidence, said that everything was under her control and she could be relied upon, but suddenly froze. Strange red symbols appeared on the display. She explained that for some reason the system did not accept the stop command, and to execute it the control function had to be activated. But according to her, there were no errors in the command structure, so all this looked extremely strange. Roran asked if she could explain why the command did not work if it was correct. Lapis sighed and admitted that if she knew the exact reason, she would have fixed everything long ago, and suggested that perhaps the device had become unstable over the centuries. If that was indeed the reason, she definitely would not be able to repair the device. Ritz anxiously noticed that the entire screen was now covered with those red symbols. Rorin, feeling threatened, demanded to know what exactly was happening. Lapis finally understood. Before them was a real laboratory, so there must be a staff office here. Rorin, although hesitant, admitted that this was quite possible. Lapis added that all employees who had access to the control panels had to be registered in the laboratory system, and Rorin looked at her and asked her to explain what exactly she meant. At that moment, Ritz shouted loudly. 2 doors opened simultaneously. Chuck, frightened, exclaimed that he did not understand anything. Lapis explained in a quiet voice that there was a failure in the biometric verification. Initially, access to this object was only research status. Unregistered people, like her, could not even enter the stop command, and the flashing red symbols meant a failure of the biometric verification. She warned that if they ignored these messages and continued to enter commands, then after 3 failed attempts the system would lock all controls. That is exactly what happened. Now they could do nothing. The system recognized them as violators and activated the internal interception protocol. This meant that from now on the object would eliminate them as a threat. Ritz warned that this was extremely dangerous and insisted on a clear plan. Rorin asked for a simpler explanation because he still did not understand. Lapis explained in simple words. The system perceived them as outsiders, and now intends to get rid of them with the help of goblins. The exit is already blocked, and this control room is directly connected to the room where the goblins were created. She was sure. Any moment now they would burst in here in a group, and they would have to hold back the advance. Ritz muttered irritably, but agreed. Lapis apologized and said she would try to deceive the system. If she succeeded, the threat of goblins would disappear. But while she worked, she would be completely defenseless, and Ritz suspiciously asked why she even thought she could do it. Lapis calmly but confidently stated that she was a priestess of the god of knowledge, so she had reason to believe in her power. Roar asked if she really had an explanation for everything that was happening. Lapis declared with dignity that she had not told a single lie. Roran nodded as if agreeing that it could be so, and told her to continue working. He himself promised that they would hold back the enemy onslaught. Lapis thanked them and said she fully relied on them. Nim warned. The goblins were already approaching. Ritz shook his head. There was no other choice, and added that at least the doors were not that wide. He ordered Nim to stay close to the device and cover Lapis while she worked. Then he turned to Chuck and asked if he was ready. Chuck, gritting his teeth, replied that he would manage, although everything that was happening was driving him mad. Ritz looked at Rorin and said that now it was up to him. Rorin confidently confirmed that he was ready. They rushed into battle against the goblin invasion, repelling them one by one. Suddenly a black goblin appeared, even more dangerous than the others. Chuck sharply looked at Colts and ordered him to stay closer to Lapis because he himself could no longer fight. Colts, bowing his head, quietly apologized for his helplessness. Loren, looking at this black goblin, firmly said that he would take him. He continued to fight desperately with the black goblin, putting his last strength into every strike. Rorin felt as if the sword was about to break from the tension and from the continuous blows against the thick, dense hide of the enemy. This blade would not survive another such clash. He shouted to Lapis and loudly demanded, "How much longer will you keep working?" Lapis, without raising her eyes from the panel, said she would do everything as quickly as possible, but immediately warned. She was not just fighting the system now, but dealing with technology left by an ancient kingdom, and such a complex thing could not be overcome in a couple of minutes. Despite everything, she hoped to complete the operation no later than in an hour. Nim exclaimed fearfully that she had almost no arrows left, and they simply would not be enough for such a long time. Colt admitted that he had only one spell charge left. After that, he would no longer be able to use magic. Chuck, hitting another goblin, shouted fiercely that their number seemed endless. Inside him, unease was growing. With each new wave, these creatures became stronger. They already surpassed in strength even those they had fought before. Rorin noticed that in the middle of the battle, the goblins still carried away the bodies of their fallen from the field, and this disturbing sight caused him disgust. Lapis, hearing this, explained that for them, fallen goblins were a vital resource, and added that allowing goblins to take bodies even for a few seconds was extremely dangerous. And Chuck, breathing heavily, admitted that if they really could stop this, they would have done it long ago. Ritz assured that they were doing everything possible to hold back the enemy and maintain their position. Rorin asked in surprise if it was really that important, but Lapis reminded him that they had already discussed this. She explained that goblins used the bodies of fallen comrades not only as simple trophies, but as carriers of experience. Each fallen goblin accumulated combat data, tactics, defense, maneuvers, strike power, and all this was passed on to new creatures, and this was the essence of their rapid evolution. The found manual reported, the process of transferring this data into a new body took only a few seconds. She explained that the room they were in was directly connected to the center where new goblins were created, and Rorin nodded. Now he understood. The longer they fought, the stronger the goblins would grow, because all the enemy's efforts were aimed at turning the experience of the fallen into the strength of new fighters. According to Lapis, as soon as enough information was gathered, the system created a new, more advanced version of the goblin. And these new enemies turned out to be much more dangerous than the previous ones. Soon, Chuck exclaimed in surprise. One of the goblins managed to deflect an arrow with a shield. He noticed that the goblins had started using weapons differently, another alarming sign of their adaptation. Ritz, with anxiety in his voice, urged everyone to speed up before the next, even stronger enemy was created. Rorin immediately reported that such an opponent had already appeared. A new creature, completely different from all others, stood before him, and he immediately rushed into battle with it. The fight became even fiercer. Rorin cursed to himself when he realized how much this new goblin surpassed the others. Its skin was so thick that any attacks barely left a mark. He roared and noticed that the goblin seemed to be smiling. This mocking smile angered him. He felt that the opponent was mocking him, seeing weakness in him. Rohan shouted in his soul that he would not allow himself to be judged, would not tolerate mockery, and would not admit defeat. Rorin continued fighting despite fatigue and outdated weapons. The battle was ruthless and became more brutal with each passing minute. Chuck looked around and said that the rumors about the mercenary were probably true. Rorin was indeed becoming that legendary mercenary about whom people had only whispered before. Despite the fatigue, Nim warned not to relax and insisted that Loren behave worthy of his title, because the situation was becoming critical. She added that the sword he fought with would soon break. Soon Ritz, looking at the panel and noticing strange activity in the system, anxiously shouted to Lapis. Lapis, without taking her eyes off the console, explained that she had already entered commands to shut down the object and stop goblin production. Only the final process remained, but the system stubbornly did not accept the last command. Ritz got angry and demanded explanations. Lapis said the problem was simple. The system would not shut down. If she could completely disable it, the previous commands would work, the ruins would start collapsing, and goblin production would stop forever. Ritz shouted that if the system could not be stopped through the console, maybe it was worth just physically destroying it. And Lapis replied in a heavy voice that if he was capable of that, do not waste time, because the system was miraculously durable. It had worked for hundreds of years without maintenance, and was still in perfect condition. If someone could physically destroy the mechanism, it would probably work. Ritz silently approached, ordered Lapis to step back, and struck the device with the sword with all his might, but disaster struck. Ritz's sword broke, and the device was not even damaged. He roared with rage when he realized how strong that protection was. Lapis explained that the system was covered with a magical protective spell and ordinary physical attacks did not work. To destroy it, a special magical weapon was needed. Without it, it was impossible to break the device. At that moment, Lauren's sword could not withstand the pressure and finally broke. Rorin pondered this and replayed everything that had been said in his mind. Lapis's words about the magical protective coating caught his thoughts, and he sighed heavily, realizing he still had one more attempt. He sharply ordered Lapis to step away from the console, quickly took out a pendant that once belonged to a goblin mage, and threw it into the very heart of the device. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Lapis's mind. Before her lay a necklace that once belonged to that very goblin wizard. She immediately recognized it. It was an artifact known as the Mana Drain Necklace, an item that gradually absorbs magical energy and accumulates it to release at the right moment. Meanwhile, a sudden thought flashed in Lauren's mind. Since the time after the adventures in the goblin's lair, the necklace ended up in their hands. Quite some time had passed, and it could have accumulated enough magical energy. If so, there was no better moment to use it. Suddenly, the air was pierced by a loud, powerful sound, as if a discharge had passed through the entire building and shook the stone walls. Colts, feeling the magical change, was stunned to hear that the protective barrier had disappeared. It no longer seemed to have simply dissolved into the air. Chak looked around and noticed even more goblins approaching. He cursed fiercely, swearing at their endless stream. At that moment, Rorin, wasting no time, threw his broken swords right into the very center of the control system. His movement was accompanied by a sudden, sharp surge of magic from the necklace he was already using, and now he channeled this power into the attack. The system, once reliably protected, was completely destroyed. The mechanisms inside sparked, then froze, and a powerful energy pulse swept through the room. As if by a wave of a hand, the goblins began to fall one after another. Their bodies became limp, movement ceased, the flow was cut off. Those approaching collapsed unconscious, as if an invisible thread that connected them to the source of life had broken, and Ritz, watching this, barely uttered that the goblins had truly stopped. Thoughts flashed through Lapis's mind. She wondered if it was really over. She felt she could move. Her body was not paralyzed, a good sign, and she decided that there probably wasn't that much mana in the necklace, so last time the radius of effect was smaller, and yet now it was enough to turn the tide of the battle. They miraculously survived. She was stunned that Loren could come up with such a thing in such an extreme situation, and although it was unexpected even for her, along with admiration came anxiety. She shouted at Loren, reproaching him for how dangerous it was, but her voice instantly became anxious when she noticed he did not respond. Approaching closer, she saw that Loren had fainted and fallen lifelessly to the floor. Nim noticed something strange on the goblin's body and sharply turned her reins. Later came the moment. Rorin slowly opened his eyes and regained consciousness after the earlier events. Lapis, with relief on her face, reported that, to her great joy, he had finally woken up and thanked fate for returning to consciousness. Rorin lightly and irritably slapped Lapis on the head, indicating his displeasure, and said that she should not so recklessly and spontaneously jump on men without permission or reason. In response, Lapis slightly indignantly explained that where they were, there were no available and comfortable places to sit, except what she had done. To this, Rorin, trying to stay calm, noted that even in this situation she could still choose an empty spot on the bed, perfectly suitable for sitting. Lapis, clearly dissatisfied, stated that the bed was so hard and uncomfortable that, in her opinion, if you sit for a long time, your butt would simply fall off. And Rorin, continuing the conversation, clarified where they were now and, judging by the surroundings, guessed that it was a hospital or some medical facility. Lapis confirmed his guess. They really were in a hospital, and, asking him to recall the last moment before losing consciousness, suggested telling what happened after he fainted. Rorin said that the last thing he remembered was throwing the longsword right into the device that was the center of that clash. Lapis gladly noted that he showed no signs of memory loss or thinking problems. and added that his berserker state turned out to be much milder and less destructive than others in similar situations. Rorin replied with irony. Her words sounded as if there were good and bad berserker states in nature, and that itself was strange. Lapis, with a hint of surprise, confirmed that she indeed considered it obvious, and emphasized that more important was what happened after he threw his longsword into the device. The events moved to the guild, where its representative sincerely thanked for the investigation report and the study of the ruins, and rejoiced that the whole team returned from the dangerous place safe and sound. After that, he informed the participants that the next administrator was standing nearby, from whom they could receive their well-deserved reward. It was also found out that the tokens the team brought from the ruins raised no doubts about their authenticity, and it turned out they belonged to members of the Silver Rank team, who had also previously participated in this quest. A guild representative added that they already knew the name of the leader of that other group and would arrange another search of the ruins to find all remaining relics and lost artifacts that might still be there, and at the end of the conversation promised to settle this and asked no one to worry. He would take the matter under his personal control. Outside, Ritz, one of the participants, admitted that he had heard the name of that mysterious man only once, and it would be much better to hear it directly from the person himself. Ritz noted that after they were assigned to scout the ruins, they barely found any treasure or artifact worth talking about. He added that after deducting all expenses for mission preparation and medical recovery afterward, their finances were in a miserable state. They were practically out of money. Nim, wanting to emphasize the positive, stressed that despite everything, they all survived and returned intact. And for her, that was the greatest achievement. Kulti sincerely thanked it for the opportunity to meet two strangers who turned out to be extremely useful allies in this situation. Thinking about everything, Chuck admitted that the one at the control panel turned out to be an exceptionally outstanding person, and for a moment he even thought that the mercenary from the rumors might really be standing before him. He recalled that according to legends, that man had a body like the wind, and when that wind rushed by, everything in its path was torn to pieces with terrible force. Ritz suggested that this mercenary was named Windcutter, and confidently said that it could not be him. Such a person was too famous to be a simple bronze rank adventurer. But Chuck replied, even if it's not him, it's hard to imagine that such things they saw could be done by 2 or 3 people at the same time. He remembered that the young man once said he was actually a mercenary, and that was what truly interested Ritz. Ritz responded to Chuck, advising, if you really have so much free time to fantasize, you better hurry with your treatment and get back to work. Meanwhile, Lapis continued explaining that as soon as the device was destroyed, the protective magical lock fell off, so the relic activated built-in commands cancel and sleep, and all their effects immediately took effect. Lapis concluded that because of this, the ruins became completely useless and lost their original meaning, and also added that the main device in them was completely destroyed. It was precisely because of a certain necklace embedded in its structure that all the internal magical circles crumbled and lost their power. According to her, with the current level of magical knowledge and technology, no mage could restore or repair this device, and unfortunately for Ritz and his companions, as Lapis admitted, the reward for this task was very modest, so they remained dissatisfied with her group. Lapis realized that about half of what she said were jokes and should not be taken too seriously, while Rorin noted that, considering their research yielded nothing useful, this was not surprising. He added that although the investigation was deemed a failure, it was not entirely pointless. In the end, the team still received a fairly large reward, and Lapis sincerely admitted that she did something she absolutely should not have done. Loren wondered whether he should still apologize for what happened. Lapis was thinking about something else. She feared that problems might arise if strange or awkward connections appeared between them, Ritz, and the other participants. Lapis said aloud that she overheard conversations about sealing the deactivated ruins later after sending a reconnaissance team there for further study. And from her point of view, this place was no longer suitable for further use, so she thought it better to be cautious than to regret short-sightedness later. Rorin calmly nodded. Understood, and then quietly asked who exactly brought him here and where their hospital was located now. Lapis replied reservedly that she was the one who carried him when he lost consciousness. She could not blame Ritz and the others, although they offered to help, because they themselves were injured, and that they were now in a city called Cafe. Warren said irritably that it seemed he had caused a lot of trouble. Lapis, trying to calm him down, replied that it was not worth the effort and not such a serious problem, and by the way added that their mission to get rid of the goblins ultimately failed. 3 of their companions did not return. They did not destroy the goblin lair, and had no proof that they defeated even one goblin, so defeat seemed inevitable and natural. After these words, Rorin remembered and asked about the fate of that pouch with ears. Lapis said sadly that it was probably lost during the last battle, and Rorin exploded, angrily complaining about what was happening. Lapis's thoughts returned again to the moment when Ritz, just as Rohan fainted, expressed a desire to leave, because at that time there was still no certainty that the danger was truly over. Because of this, she was unable to gather any material from the goblins' bodies to later use as evidence. But she did not want to become a burden to others, so she gave up on this idea. Rorin, still with bitter disappointment in his heart, said that it was a real shame. He added that at least he got out of there alive, and despite all their efforts, they ended up with nothing. He admitted, although those guys were reckless, they were not true villains, and he also emphasized that Lapis was not that bad either. Lapis quietly thanked him for those words, and hope was visible in her voice. The reconnaissance squad would still be able to find and rescue those girls, because they had only encountered ordinary goblins. This meant that, unfortunately, the team received no reward for their request and even incurred expenses during the trip. The girl added that she had already spent money from his wallet on travel, and treatment and hospital stay were a completely different matter. She said that she paid everything out of her own pocket, hoping that Ron would someday repay her. Then Ron asked how long he had been unconscious. Lapis admitted that he had been away for about 3 days, counting the travel day. So if you add the cost of treatment and accommodation, 2 days and 1 night, it came to about 5 silver coins. She asked him not to worry, and gently explained that he would only have to repay the money he owed her, without any additional interest, and Rorin, hesitating a little, admitted that even then he could not afford such an amount. Lapis calmly explained that she would not force him to pay everything at once, and was ready to allow him to repay the debt in installments. Ifrarin, holding back his skepticism, noted that such terms sounded too good to be true. In Lapis's thoughts at that moment, there was one thing. She had done it deliberately, purposefully pursued him, spending almost all her savings and ending up without money. Lapis knew. Acting so that he remained indebted to her was a bit cruel, but she did not care. Finally, she openly said that in exchange for all those efforts and resources spent, she wanted Rorin to agree to go with her. In Lapis's mind grew one important thought. If she set out with this swordsman, they would reach the minimum number in the group, which was especially important for receiving quests. In her view, such a partnership was the ideal way to keep intrusive and irritating companions, whom she considered parasites, at a decent distance, while also giving them a chance to prove that they were a real and effective group by showing others their skills and combat potential. She clearly understood. Although she had the power of her demonic lineage, traveling alone, especially under the guise of a priestess, meant facing real, tangible difficulties, both in daily life and in relationships with people. She realized Rorin was a warrior in strength, and although he knew her true origin and that her race caused hatred among people, he did not change his attitude toward her, neither in behavior nor in gaze. This showed not only the strength of his spirit but also his reliability. In her thoughts, he had already become not just a comrade in battle but a savior to whom she was deeply grateful. Deciding that now was not the time to discuss financial difficulties, Lapis supported the idea of their possible alliance. She emphasized that a joint journey with a priestess could greatly help Rorin himself. She added that the deal seemed fair and balanced and, in her opinion, advantageous. Rorin responded with slight compliance, admitting that the situation was developing in such a way that he simply had no choice. He had to accept this offer, especially in his current position. Hearing this, Lapis asked if his words could be considered consent, because it was important to her. Rorin agreed but set one condition. Their alliance would last only until he repaid her debt, which had accumulated due to expenses for his treatment, accommodation, and travel. Lapis willingly agreed to his terms and promised that everything would be exactly as he wanted, while sincerely expressing hope for fruitful and interesting cooperation in the future. Rorin reservedly confirmed that he hoped so too, but somewhat embarrassedly reminded her that it would be good if she finally stopped riding on him. At that moment, another thought flashed through Lapis's mind, which she kept secret. According to her, this request still turned out to be a plus for her, and while they rummaged through the room searching for instructions and a manual, she discreetly pocketed several valuable items. Her movements were so subtle and precise that even a professional thief, if you stood nearby, would not have noticed. Most of the things she appropriated were enchanted with some kind of magic, so the medallion in their hands most likely also came from that room, and therefore the question of money did not worry her at the moment. But she felt a little sorry for Loren. His debt to her would only grow from now on, and she already intended to take advantage of it. Despite this, Lapis felt genuine excitement about the upcoming adventure. Inside, she promised herself to stay close to Rorin and walk his path with him, no matter how difficult it might be. Two men stood aside whispering about troubling news. One, with a worried expression, said that another village had been destroyed, and the other, not too surprised, replied that this had happened before. He specified that it was a pioneer village in the north, and added that this was nothing new or unexpected. They concluded that everything happening was directly related to the expansion of agricultural lands and the possibility of collecting even more taxes, a measure beneficial exclusively to the rich. As they say, it is these rich people who implement plans to seize new lands, so, according to them, in such a situation peasants should at least be minimally protected if they are sent to such dangerous places. One of the men gloomily thought that, in the end, even if the peasants are completely driven out, their houses destroyed, and they themselves die, no one will particularly care. They reached a common conclusion. In this world, money rules. Rorin, observing their conversation, mentally agreed. People never give up money voluntarily. It doesn't matter if they are simple peasants, kings, aristocrats, mercenaries, or even adventurers. All strive for material wealth. Rowan's sudden urge to spend money caused a reaction from Lapis. She looked at him in surprise, and with a slight smirk remarked that it seemed he had been drinking since morning. Knowing that he had spent 2 days in the hospital, she understood his desire to drink, though she doubted whether he had the money for it. Loren, not hiding his fatigue, admitted that his mercenary squad had been defeated, and after that he had nothing left but to become an adventurer. The first mission he agreed to was an unpleasant trial. It ended, and although he did not say directly whether it was successful, he noticed that now he had a companion. Lapis, restraining reproach, said that drinking on an empty stomach, especially after illness, is very harmful and can cause problems. To this, Rorin reminded her that he simply had no money, so talking about drinking was pointless. Lapis, not losing her cheerful mood, smiled and said that, of course, she would pay herself. She immediately addressed the waitress to place an order. For herself, she asked for an egg sandwich without mustard, and for Loren, with ham. Rowan mentally noticed that although Lapis serves as a priestess of the goddess of knowledge, her mind was astonishing. He even thought that she was too intelligent for someone who was supposed to be just a spiritual servant. When Lapis asked the waitress to add everything to the common bill, Rowan pondered again. He knew that she was skilled in both divine spells and demonic magic. At first, he started working with her because he thought it would be a good start for a novice like him. But now it seemed to him that everything was turning out much more complicated than he expected, and he could only sigh heavily. When Rorin asked how much a ham sandwich cost, she replied that it was the same as an egg one. 5 copper coins. He sadly noted that his debt to her was only growing. Lapis, without losing optimism, said that sitting idly in such a situation was not an option. Rorin mentally confirmed that it was precisely because of constant financial problems that he became an adventurer. Since he met Lapis, took the first task, ended up in the ruins of an ancient civilization, and almost died. The battle was incredibly fierce, and although he survived, he was left with nothing. All expenses fell on Lapis's shoulders, so he decided to work with her until he returned every last coin. Lapis, tasting the food, enthusiastically noticed that it turned out unexpectedly delicious. At that moment, Rohan pondered again. When would he finally manage to pay off his debts? He reached out to the dish and said he would also try a little. Lapis politely asked him to start, then reminded him. Although they were going to work, Rorin was still unarmed. He sighed and said that without a sword, only the simplest tasks remained for him, like cleaning ditches, and Lapis was outraged and replied that she would not allow it. Such work would leave an unpleasant smell, and she, as the one now working with him, did not want him to smell bad. She said she had a remedy that would get rid of the unpleasant smell, and if he used it, she would not mind such tasks. Rorin wondered if she would later deduct the cost of this item from his reward, and asked if she had any tasks now that he could take in his current state. Lapis suggested postponing heavy topics for later and for now, to focus on food, and Rorin somewhat skeptically noted that these topics were not that difficult. Roran burned with envy. One of them noticed how cunning he was. Although he was only a copper-rank adventurer, he had already found a woman who fed him, and they envied and dreamed of the same. Warren glanced at their badges and mentally marked them as iron rank. Lapis, noticing that he was scrutinizing these two, advised him simply not to react to their words. But Warren replied that if such people are allowed to behave like that with impunity even once, they will definitely continue. Lapis tried to understand his position. Probably he is guided by mercenary principles, but she thought it was foolish to attack everyone who rudely says something, and those men are not even worth attention because they don't even have women who would do such things for them. These words, which she spoke aloud, were heard by the same two. One of them reacted rudely and asked what exactly she had just said. Roring's face froze with a tense expression, and he was clearly ready for a fight. He decided that if it came to this, he would fight them, and, if necessary, kill. Lapis, on the other hand, said there was no point in killing anyone, because that would immediately turn them into criminals in the eyes of the law and the guild. She sternly reminded that 90% of misunderstandings between adventurers end in tragic casualties, so it is better to avoid escalation, and categorically insisted that no one should rummage through pockets. The last thing they need is to be caught stealing in a crowded place. To her remark, Roring only shouted briefly, as if restraining anger, and Lapis more quietly but firmly added that if a fight starts, they will have to pay for the damaged property of the establishment, and calmly stated that she is ready to cover all expenses, and if Roring decides to wreck everything, she will pay the damages without problems. Meanwhile, the two men who were watching them began to speak rudely. One sharply and humiliatingly said that he would forgive them only if she got down on her knees before him, because she is just a woman. They said that she, as a priestess, could be useful in many things, and one even added that Rorin had already had fun with her and declared, "Now it's their turn. They are ready to use violence." Hearing such words, Lapis responded indignantly, emphasizing that saying such things in front of an innocent girl is completely unacceptable, and openly called them real ruffians. Lapis mentally admitted to herself. In the end, it all ended with her getting into a fight. When the situation calmed down a bit, Lapis suggested gathering medicinal herbs and noted that it is a fairly simple and accessible way to earn a little money. Rorin enthusiastically supported the idea. The task is to gather medicinal herbs in the forest near the city, and he added that there are no dangerous monsters there, so it is possible to manage even without weapons. Lapis clarified that the guild pays 2 copper coins for each herb. She calculated all the numbers and said that to fully repay the debt, Rorin would have to collect at least 705 plants. Rorin, hearing this, asked not to make it any more painful for him. Lapis replied that everything seemed quite simple. Then Rorin asked why she took it upon herself to gather the herbs. Lapis said that she herself hoped to earn money this way. It would be a pity if someday she could no longer lend to Rorin again, and then half-jokingly reproached him for relaxing too often and missing possible herbs because of it. Rorin sincerely admitted that it was not easy for him at all, adding that if it were a fight, he would have long since paid off the entire debt. Lapis instantly reminded him that he didn't even have a weapon, and Rorin agreed, saying that he was unlikely to gather much. Lapis sighed philosophically. Nothing can be done. It was a usual request that constantly sounded and always found someone. He suggested returning, and Rorin reluctantly agreed, confirming that it was time to go back. Lapis then reminded, "The guild advises taking 30 copper coins for a hotel room. Food costs from 5 to 7, and a glass of drink. 2, so the minimum daily expenses come out to about 45 to 53 copper coins. Considering this, even after fulfilling the current request, Rorin would still be in the negative. She suggested giving him a little more money and buying the most necessary things to at least slightly improve his situation. Rorin said aloud that in such a situation it was strange to imagine how adventurers of the copper rank would survive at all. He sincerely doubted whether they would really manage. Lapis frankly said that most of them live in debt, do foolish things, take risky tasks for money, and if they make mistakes, they simply say goodbye to life. So she considered it smartest to quickly rise to the iron rank and find a reliable, strong team. Rowan realized that the world they lived in was truly harsh. He mentally noted that mercenaries, it seemed, were not so poor with money. He added that this was most likely achieved thanks to the efforts of the commander and the accountant's skill. Lapis said that whatever the circumstances, one has to live somehow, and asked if she should carry her things. Roar sharply stopped her and whispered for her to be quiet. He heard someone nearby. Lapis then suggested, "In such a situation it is better to flee to avoid danger." Roar agreed that it could be wise, but in his heart there was a strange, anxious premonition. Soon he noticed the girl and called her. Lapis noticed with surprise that it was completely unclear how she ended up here. Loren suggested that maybe she was simply lost. Lapis carefully examined her. The girl was barefoot, but there were no wounds or calluses on her feet. Her clothes were clean. It became clear that she probably did not come here on her own. She had no developed muscles. The skin on her hands and feet was soft, not roughened, and all this indicated that she was well cared for. So most likely she was of noble origin. He roared and looked around tiredly. Seeing the girl, he felt that he did not like it at all. Her presence was somehow strange and disturbing. Suddenly Lapis noticed movement in the trees and shouted, warning that forest wolves were attacking them. Rorin, without hesitation, rushed to deal with the threat and promised to protect the girl. For him it was a matter of honor. He made it clear that he would handle the wolves himself and rescue the child from danger. Lapis did not object, but strangely reminded him. "You have no weapon, and without it, the fight could become much harder." Rorin confidently replied that this would not cause any problems at all. He said confidently that with such opponents, whom he simply called dog, he could cope even without a sword. A foggy thought flashed through Lapis's mind. Did he really just call these predators dogs? After the victory over the wolves, Rorin asked with interest if they could be eaten, and Lapis calmly replied that the meat of these creatures was not suitable for food, but the skins could be sold and money earned from them. Hearing about the skins, Rorin noted that unfortunately he had no knife, and that definitely hindered the matter. He regretted this, then looked at the girl who was still unconscious, and asked how she was feeling. Lapis examined her and said with relief that there were no visible wounds on the body and, according to her observation, the child seemed to be fine. They managed to find her before the wolves could reach her, and that saved her life. Rowan thoughtfully agreed that in life everything must be in balance. If someone is terribly unlucky, then somewhere someone else is bathing in luck, like this girl. Lapis, thinking along the same lines, added that by such logic somewhere now there must be someone extremely unhappy, and even wondered if they had in mind someone who is having a very hard time right now. Rorin fell silent and asked himself a practical question. What to do with the girl they found? Lapis answered decisively. She must not be left alone under any circumstances. Rorin, though reluctantly, admitted that he did not want to take her to the city. It could bring even more problems and suspicions. Lapis proposed a smart solution. As soon as we return to the city, we will place the girl under the guild's care. Let their people take care of her. Rorin approached the girl and gently lifted her into his arms. Lapis, noticing his movement, asked what happened, and Rorin waved it off. Nothing special. Just the girl turned out to be strangely light, even for a child. Lapis was a little surprised, noticed that she looked a bit chubby, and wondered who she could be if she looked like that and weighed so little. Rorin said cautiously that maybe when the girl wakes up, she will tell everything herself, but emphasized that they do not want anyone to perceive their actions as kidnapping. Lapis jokingly painted a picture from the outside. Two suspicious people taking away an innocent girl. Rorin irritably asked her at least not to include him among the most suspicious villains, and in his mind he summed up. It was this meeting with the mysterious girl that started their new adventure, full of uncertainty and trials. Rorin and Lapis entered the city calmly, encountering no resistance or suspicion around. Lapis realized that everything would have been completely different if they had really been criminals. Then passing through the gates without obstacles would have been much more difficult. But thanks to the priestess's escort, they walked confidently and without fear. Rorin said with admiration what a miracle it is to be a priestess whom everyone worships, and Lapis added that in such a role people automatically give you incredible trust, which ordinary travelers do not get. They arrived in Kofa City and immediately headed to the Avengers Guild, where a woman from the guild was already waiting for them. She looked at them and asked if they had saved the man in the forest, about whom she had probably already been told. Rorin confirmed that this is exactly what happened and called the girl to see everything with her own eyes. She replied that the guild would take responsibility for what was found and asked if anyone was against it. Rorin replied that he had no objections because he himself did not intend to accompany this girl forever. Then the guild representative said she would like to talk with them in the guest room to discuss some circumstances. Rorin immediately insisted on an important detail and stated that what happened was not a kidnapping. The guild representative replied that she understood perfectly well because normal kidnappers would not bring the victim directly to the guild, and added that she wanted to discuss something else, after which she immediately got to the point. She awkwardly exhaled but reported that the guild wants to temporarily restrict the movements of Rorin and Lapis. Rorin jumped in surprise. He did not expect this at all. Lapis tried to find out what exactly this meant and whether such measures were related to suspicions against them, but the guild representative hastened to assure nothing of the sort. No charges are being brought against them. She explained that the guild simply wants to find out who this girl is, and until the results are in, Rorin and Lapis better not do anything on their own. Lapis anxiously asked if something had happened to that girl that could explain such a step. The guild representative admitted, right now she cannot say anything specific. Rar wanted to know what exactly the restrictions were and how long they would last. The interlocutor said that if a specific term is needed, it is only a few days, during which the first results should appear. The guild asked not to leave the city and, if possible, to stay in a certain hotel, and Rorin only remarked that after this conversation he felt neither calmer nor lighter. The guild representative explained that the hotel is located on the main street and is called Monogotsvitia. Rorin honestly admitted that this name meant nothing to him, and Lapis noted with interest that Monogotsvitia claims to be the best in the city, is famous for its high level of service, and is very expensive. The guild representative added that the guild will cover all living expenses and all amenities, and if they need anything else, just mention the guild and it will be paid for. Rorin suspiciously asked if the guild really thinks that an adventurer can be bribed with such treatment. After all, too good treatment only causes distrust, and he added that no mercenary would take on a task just because of promises of mountains of gold. Lapis guessed that they were simply expected to pretend that they noticed nothing. Rorin reminded that this contradicts Lapis's moral principles. Lapis confirmed he is against such treatment. Rorin asked again what is really going on with the girl they brought to the city. Lapis responded passionately that he will not allow their actions to be restricted without explanations, insisted on at least a brief clarification, and asked if this could somehow harm them. The guild representative replied that the likelihood of this is extremely low. Only a few people in the guild know the girl, and to find out everything they will have to wait until she wakes up. And this may take several days. Lapis understood. The guild wants to find out who this girl is, and until it is proven that Rorin and he are not involved, they will be kept nearby. He was confident. As soon as the guild is convinced that the girl was found by accident in the forest, all suspicions will be dispelled. Meanwhile, they can stay at the inn at the guild's expense. Ron asked to clarify whether the guild would really take care of the tavern and the money, and the guild representative assured that everything would be settled and asked if they needed a double room. Rowan sharply replied that they needed separate rooms. Otherwise, no deal could be made. He insisted that this be said directly, and Lapis supported this decision. And addressing the priestess, Rowan once again emphasized that personally, he was against living together. A little later, Rowan suggested that the girl they found in the forest was unlikely to be local. More likely, she came from afar, and possibly belonged to some noble family. Lapis sighed in surprise. How it happened that she ended up completely alone in the middle of the forest without villages and safe roads. He was curious about what could really have happened. He added that for now they could only enjoy the comfort of the expensive tavern and patiently wait for the guild representatives to get in touch, and quietly asked, "Are you tired, Satellite?" Rorin, instead of a direct answer, admitted that he did not like what was happening at all, and his body felt unpleasant, as if he could not even tense up. He added that he did not think it was due to excessive tension, but at the same time his whole body felt sluggish and uncontrollable. Lapis, hearing this, said that although Rorin's mental state was already normal, physically he was still recovering from recent events. Rorin hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to agree. 2 days passed, and a girl from the guild approached them, informing that the guild had recognized them as innocent, so all previous restrictions on their movements were lifted. She sincerely thanked them for their help and said that now they could do as they pleased. Lapis was surprised by such brevity and asked confusedly why he was not told what exactly had happened. The guild representative explained that the question of providing information is decided by the guild itself, and such data is given only to selected adventurers of iron rank and above. Lapis decisively retorted, reminding her that they were the ones who brought the girl to the guild and, regardless of the nature of the information, deserved an explanation. At that moment, Rorin restrained his companion, interrupting her attempt to insist, and Lapis reacted with surprise to his intervention. Rorin explained that his comrades serve the god of knowledge and by nature strive to learn even what is usually hidden. The guild representative was a bit embarrassed, admitted she had heard of those obsessed with the search for truth, but reminded that the final word belongs to the guild. Rowan calmly admitted that he understood she could not tell him anything, and since that was the case, there was no point in insisting, and he also asked whether this information had already been passed on to those who were supposed to receive it, and if there was at least some way to find out. The guild representative calmly confirmed that they had already identified the circle of people to whom this information could be entrusted and that it had been passed on. Ravrin decided that if they were found innocent, they were now free to leave, so he announced that today they would be evicted from the hotel. Lapis tried to stop him. The guild representative thanked him for his cooperation and officially ended the guild's involvement in the case. Lapis, clearly worried, wanted to know exactly what he had planned. But Rorin explained that pressuring the girl was not allowed. She would not reveal the secret even under pressure, and if she accidentally slipped, she would be very badly off. He added that talking to someone ordered to be silent is a real hassle, so it's better to turn to someone who can tell. Lapis asked if Rorin knows exactly whom to turn to. Rorin confidently said that he knows both the name and the face of the person he needs, so they will quickly figure it out. Lapis grabbed Warren by the hand, not hiding his admiration. Warren wanted to object, but Lapis, looking him straight in the eyes, explained that she did not know where to go, so he would have to lead her himself, and she insisted that he not hesitate and act quickly. Rorin entered one of the city establishments and began questioning local visitors, gathering the necessary information. Soon, returning to the acquaintance, Rowan noticed that he seemed not to have seen him for a long time, although in fact not much time had passed, and suggested sitting down to continue the conversation. A man named Chuck looked at them with surprise and asked how they even found this place. Rorin replied that they had to ask several people before getting here, and Lapis added that it cost them 30 copper coins, but the expense was necessary, so she paid herself, then warmly greeted Chuck, emphasizing that she hadn't seen him for a long time. He even recognized the interlocutors, nodded, made it clear that everything was understood, and asked his sister to bring 2 more mugs of ale. Rorin declined the treat, but noted that he was still grateful for the offer. He even insisted, explaining that they helped a lot, so he wants to at least treat them to something as a token of gratitude. Lapis replied that they actually hadn't done anything special, and all the previous work went down the drain. Chuck sharply cut in, "Don't talk nonsense, the money really disappeared, but that happens, and the main thing is that they are alive, and that's already good." He sighed, and added that he couldn't say he wasn't annoyed, but all that was in the past now, so there's no point in worrying. Then he raised his glass and proposed a toast to this meeting. Rorin apologized, probably for the situation or for not being able to join the toast. Chuck replied that he was fine and not offended. He noticed that they clearly didn't come just to talk about trifles, and asked why they had found him at all. Rorin explained that a few days ago they found a girl in the forest and took her in. Chuck, stunned, realized it was them, and recalled that this matter was discussed in the guild only among those with iron rank and above. He understood that this was exactly why they came to him. Revenant explained that his partner wanted to learn at least a little about that girl, and Chuck responded understandingly, reminding her that he was a silver rank adventurer, and, in his words, no one could just demand that he go and lay out everything he knew. He added that mediocre adventurers who like to talk about their work usually don't reach silver rank. Rorin explained that he did not expect such frankness at all, but after consulting with his partner, they decided, if anyone can sell them such information, it is Chuck. Chuck, hearing this, reminded that Rohan once saved his life, and proposed a compromise. He agreed to tell, only if they promised not to reveal the source. Rohan promised that he would not cause Chuck any problems. Lapis sincerely confirmed that she would keep her word, thanked him, and addressed him as Sir. And Chuck smiled, approved their position, but immediately warned that he could not vouch for the truthfulness of the information, and advised them to decide for themselves what to do with it. He then shared what he knew. According to his information, the girl they brought was named Sina Lombartia, and she was from the city-state of Hansa. Roar noted the name Hansa and tried to comprehend what he heard. Lapis explained that the city-state of Hansa lay about 3 days' journey south of the city of Kaffa. It was a small country with a capital of the same name, and although the name Sina was unknown to her, the surname Lombartia belonged to the ruling family of that land. Rorin was surprised by Lapis's knowledge. Lapis laughed cheerfully and asked if he also wanted to praise her. Chuck continued and said that Sina was the only daughter of the ruling family, and added that their position was not very brilliant, but he still thought that being rude would be inappropriate. Rorin decided to find out why. When they first brought the girl, they were immediately forbidden to move. Chuck explained simply. The reason was banal. Jill did not want them to reveal everything too early. A lonely noblewoman found in the middle of the forest would have been immediately noticed, and a wave of rumors would have instantly risen. He added that usually one could expect a reward for help, but this time they would get nothing. Firstly, no one asked for help, and secondly, there was no one who could confirm whether this girl was really Senna. Lapis assumed that in 2 days they would manage to find out her identity. Chuck said that no one had informed him of anything, but inside he felt guilty and suspected that the girl was real. The messenger to the Hansa had not yet returned, and Rorin assumed that maybe he simply had not had time. Only 2 days had passed. Lapis recalled that the organization's heralds usually had magical devices that sent their location, and assumed that the connection with him was probably cut off. Chuck added that the guild clearly decided not to pay much attention to the Hansa, but also did not want to anger it, so they gathered several squads of iron rank adventurers and were going to send the girl along with these groups. The guild had already officially asked for her to be returned to the Hansa. He added that the payment for the job was modest, so silver rank adventurers refused to participate. Loren noted that he thought there was nothing particularly sensitive in that information. Chuck agreed. but with a bitter smile noted that such information was considered internal and was usually not disclosed. The guild did not tell them everything simply because they were copper rank adventurers. Lapis pondered what needed to be done to gain access to such information, and Chuck expressed doubt, hinting that it might not only be a matter of rank. Lapis, with a slight smile, noted that she was only interested in simple human curiosity, because it is natural to want to know how a representative of an aristocratic family, who lived in comfort and seemed protected from all troubles, ended up completely alone in the wild forest 3 days' journey from her home. She enthusiastically added that it was not surprising to want to clarify everything down to the smallest details. Rorin noted that at their current bronze rank, no one from the guild leadership would invite them to discuss such matters. Lapis suggested that maybe there was a way to bypass this restriction. Others said they had never encountered this and that it was impossible to do, but Chuck, overhearing the conversation, intervened and stated that such a way did exist, which interested Lapis and made her want to find out what it was. Chuck explained, "It happens. If a silver rank adventurer officially recommends someone, a copper adventurer can temporarily be considered a participant of the iron rank. If Ritz himself sends such a request and adds a personal recommendation from Chuck and his comrades, then Rorin and Lapis will be fully able to participate in this matter." Lapis enthusiastically began to say that this was a great opportunity, but Rorin interrupted her. He wanted to make sure that Chuck was truly confident in this decision, because if it fails, both the place and his reputation will suffer. Chuck answered easily and confidently, assuring that there would be no problems. Added that Ritz would most likely say the same, emphasized that everything was voluntary. If Rorin does not want to, no one will force him, but if he decides to join, Chuck would like him to first get a good weapon. Rorin began to look for excuses, saying that he first wanted to deal with the weapon, and then returned to discussing the proposal and asked Chuck for some time to try to settle it in one day. Chuck quietly laughed and said that Rorin was a real weakling and behaved like a henpecked husband, and Rorin muttered that he already knew everything perfectly well. Chuck decided that if Rorin really came up with something in a day, they could return to the conversation. He assured him that the silver adventurers would not go on this mission, so their recommendation should not cause problems. Rorin said that he trusted him and immediately approached Lapis to ask for some money. Lapis, surprised, asked if he was going to buy a weapon and if it would be some big sword, to which Rorin replied that if it were so, he would not bother Chuck and others. Lapis, switching to a business tone, asked Chuck when this job would be sent. Chuck replied that he did not have exact information, but according to him, the dispatch would depend on the condition of the girl herself, and he heard that the approximate date was in 3 days. Lapis, understanding what she heard, apologized to Rorin and said that she could lend him some money, but asked to wait a bit because she was afraid that she herself would not have enough cash and would have to get more money. Rorin answered calmly that he would deal with it later, and if she needed time, he would wait, and Lapis immediately said that she was ready to get to work. Chuck jokingly said that Rorin had no urgent matters and could stay. It was hard for both of them because they had fallen in love with very unusual women. Rorin asked restrainedly on what basis such an assumption was made. Chuck slightly waved his hand and said that he understood everything perfectly because he had been in a similar situation himself. He admitted that Nim always bossed him around, using his feelings, but after thinking, he concluded that being under the heel of this grumbling woman with a flat ass was not so bad after all. But even her grumpiness became part of her charm, and Rorin remarked with a smile that if she heard that, she would quickly turn him into a hedgehog. The next day, Lapis entered the room and was surprised to see that they had obviously spent the whole night there. Nim appeared nearby and asked where Chuck was. Lapis greeted her and noted that quite some time had passed since they last saw each other, and Nim replied that it was actually not that long ago. Lapis apologized for completely forgetting to take care of new housing after they broke up, but reassured that she had already rented a suitable place and moved all her things, so there was no need to worry. Besides, Mr. Rorin had almost nothing, so she quickly managed the move. Rowan thanked her but kept wondering how she even got into his room. Lapis said she simply called them partners and was immediately let in, and Rowan mentally wondered if that was normal at all, assuming that maybe they were let in precisely because they represented the guild. Meanwhile, Nim returned to Chuck to wake him up. Lapis noticed this and asked if she came specifically for Chuck, to which Nim replied yes, she came exactly for that, to take away, as she herself said, this worthless man. Warren said they were just sitting there together, and mentally noted that most of the time he was just listening to Chuck's love story. Nim, returning to Loren, said that he was a good person and advised Lapis to take an example from him. Lapis frowned and asked if that meant she was bad. Nim left it to her judgment and reassured that there was no reason to worry. She herself would explain to Ritz that Chuck was just bragging in front of less experienced comrades, promised to pay for everything necessary, and said goodbye. Rorin, watching her leave, said that maybe it was worth apologizing a little later. Lapis, a bit embarrassed, reminded that she already said it was okay, and then added that she wanted to know, was she really that bad? Rorin replied that he was not the one to judge and saw no point in discussing it. Lapis looked around, assessed the situation, and advised Rorin to go to the weapons shop, insisting that he needed to buy both weapons and armor, saying that without reliable equipment no adventurer can act properly, and his things were pitiful. The armor was already noticeably battered and worn. It was time to replace it with new. Rorin, with a barely noticeable nostalgia in his voice, remarked that he had been using his equipment since his mercenary days, and it had served him faithfully ever since. In the weapons shop, Lapis immediately took the initiative and addressed Rorant, reminding him that his specialty was offensive actions. Therefore, she insisted, he should look not for simple leather, but something more reliable and durable. She immediately pointed to one of the items she recommended buying, and Rorin glanced at this item and was surprised to notice that it did not look like armor at all. Lapis explained that at first glance it was an ordinary cloak, but in reality, it was a magical artifact. The fabric was woven from black widow spider silk, which made it exceptionally strong and gave it unique properties. She energetically added that the item was enchanted with protection and self-repair spells, and it cost only 5 gold, 10 times cheaper than the market price. Lapis said that wearing this cloak over ordinary leather armor would significantly increase protection, so she confidently stated that they definitely needed to buy it. Rorant, not believing his ears, asked again whether the item really cost 10 times more, or if it was an exaggeration, and if the seller had said so, and Lapis calmly explained that the main problem was that the sellers themselves often did not know the true value of some items. She added that even the owner might not realize how valuable this item was, and if this surfaced later, the main thing was to manage to buy it before someone decided to change the price, because the price tag was still there. Lapis continued speaking but suddenly froze. One of the items she had seen earlier had disappeared. She turned to the seller and asked where the item she was interested in had gone, thinking that it had probably already been sold. The shop owner quickly brushed her off, saying that no one had bought that item yet. According to him, it was too large for the sales floor, so he moved it to the storeroom. Lapis noted with some surprise that he could have done that. The owner waved his hand strangely and admitted that several people had helped with this matter. One person could not handle it alone. Hearing this, Lapis immediately said she could pull the item back, but the owner stopped her and warned that handling such equipment was not easy, and it was not done quickly. Rorin mentally noted that although the shop was small, it actually had a good selection of goods. He thought that as soon as extra money appeared, he might allow himself to purchase auxiliary weapons, but he came to his senses that when such an opportunity would arise, no one knew. His gaze fell on a longsword, which seemed quite good to him. At that moment, a man entered the room with a confident stride, and his appearance instantly drew the attention of everyone present. He entered the shop, sharply shouted at Rorin, and demanded that he take his hands off the sword, because he himself had long been eyeing this weapon. The man boldly admitted that Rorin had a nose for quality, but replied that such a weapon was not for a simple muscular brute, advised to first sort out his combat skills, and then take on such a thing, and said he would take the sword for himself. The shop owner politely thanked him for the visit and for becoming a client, while Rorin, mentally acknowledging that money was still not enough, wondered who was standing before him. Lapis approached him, saw him gloomy, and asked if something had happened. Rorin waved it off and said everything was fine. When Lapis noticed that the sword that had just been on display was gone, she was surprised and thought that probably the long sword had already been bought. She smiled and noted that although this sword was good, she had already prepared something much better for him. Then she handed over another specimen and added that although it was impressive, it was still significantly inferior to the one she had chosen for Loren. At that moment, Rorin could not hide his surprise. Seeing the sword, he was stunned that Lapis had managed to find such a rarity. Truly an incredible weapon, worthy of the boldest adventurers. Lapis calmly enumerated the expenses. New leather armor cost 50 silver coins, a magical coat, 5 gold coins, and the sword itself, 15 gold coins. In addition, they bought potions, a spare dagger, and other useful things. The total debt reached 23 gold and 80 silver coins. Lorin thought to himself that at least Lapis forgave him for that bronze coin. That was already good, and he joked that it seemed now, besides the equipment and his own things, he himself was gradually becoming her property. Lapis replied that a traveler's equipment always belongs to himself, so there was no need to worry, and added that they had a new mission tomorrow, so it was worth resting well tonight. She said goodnight. Loren showed her where her room was. Lapis thought slightly irritably that after all, they should have booked a double room and should not have listened to Loren, and he dryly replied that she should not start talking about fears and just go to sleep. Loren, before falling to sleep, thought that this would be his second mission as an adventurer, and was sure that such a request would attract many experienced fighters. Maybe they were not on the level of the Ritz squad, but among them there were definitely iron rank adventurers. He really hoped that the team would turn out successful. The next morning at the Adventurers Guild, one of the girls energetically called Loren to the main hall to confirm his participation and register. In the hall, he immediately recognized that arrogant guy from the weapons shop whom he had seen yesterday. Recognizing Rorin, he shouted at him indignantly, calling him yesterday's fool. At that moment, Roar thought to himself that his hopes for a calm and professional team were probably shattered. He sarcastically said that now, supposedly, iron rank adventurers had completely lost their value. They take anyone and, looking at the bronze pendant on Rorin's neck, he was surprised. After all, this mission was only for participants not lower than iron. A guild member standing nearby calmly explained that Ron and Lapis had an official recommendation from a silver rank adventurer. The guy could not hide his surprise when he heard this. The guild member continued, explaining that according to guild rules such a recommendation equates the copper rank to iron, so Rowan and Lapis had full right to participate in this request. Rorin, still lost in thought that this guy was unlikely to boast about his connections. Yet despite this, he again, as before, stated that Rorin should know his place. He admitted that he himself did not understand how he got so lucky, but advised to be careful and try not to bother others. Rorin calmly nodded and promised that he would try not to interfere or disturb. That guy was surprised by such a reaction. He expected more. A guild member intervened and asked everyone to calm down, reminding them that the task requires teamwork. The boy was furious that he was equated to someone like Loren. The representative sharply intervened, emphasizing that the least he could do was simply not to interfere, and warned that if his actions obstructed the request, the guild would impose a penalty on him. She once again stressed, the guild sees no problems with the participation of Roran and Lapis. Their abilities were confirmed by silver rank adventurers. If they were an obstacle, they would have been punished. But if Frank was so important to him, then the opinion of the silver rank should matter to him. Roran, having listened to everything, calmly nodded and said he understood. The guild representative added that participation in such a request is a special case and warned not to cause problems. After which Roran once again assured that he understood his responsibility. The representative looked at him and thought. At first she believed he just had good connections, but now she felt that he truly deserved the title Iron Ranked Adventure. She was pleased by this, and then announced that the briefing would start soon, but first she needed to make sure all participants were present. Roran turned to Lapis and noticed with surprise that she had been silent the whole time. Hayakam Lapis replied with a slight smile that arguing with such people was a waste of time, so she simply remains herself, to which Roran briefly agreed. The representative announced the total number of participants, 23 people. She thanked everyone for participating and announced that this request is an official task of the Adventurers Guild. The goal is to escort a girl named Senna Lombartia to the city-state of Hansa. The representative solemnly announced that the girl named Sina is the daughter of the ruler of the city-state of Hansa, and therefore firmly emphasized that everyone participating in the request must treat her with proper respect and reverence. The guild calculated the distance in advance. To Hansa, it is 3 days, so they organized transportation by horse-drawn carts to travel quickly and safely, and the guards had a simple task: to guarantee protection on the road. She reported that the guild had previously sent messengers to Hans to warn him about the approaching scene, but unfortunately, none of them returned or made contact. Therefore, special instructions were given to be extremely careful while passing this route. Due to the increased risk, the guild announced a reward of 12 silver coins for each person who takes on the task. One of the adventurers loudly doubted. Given such dangers, this amount seems too small. The representative calmly explained that the threat level has not yet been officially confirmed, so the amount is preliminary, and promised that if the real danger turns out to be higher, the reward will be reviewed and increased. So participants should not worry about the pay. It will correspond to the level of risk. Roran thought to himself. Although the adventurers sent earlier did not return, the guild still did not give any guarantees, and they would probably have to show proof to get an additional bonus. He considered these conditions too harsh and frankly unfavorable, and the guild representative continued the briefing, reminding everyone that this request has the status of an official guild order. She warned, participants may refuse, but they will have to pay a fine. At the same time, if the task is completed successfully, in addition to the promised reward, everyone will receive special privileges from the guild. She urged, "Take this task seriously and bear full responsibility for it." Samasena, noticeably upset, stepped forward and in a pleading voice asked the escorts to take her home. She admitted that she could not promise anything now, but would definitely tell her father about what happened and ask him to additionally reward the escorts. Then she bowed low, full of gratitude and hope. Lapis asked for the contract without any hesitation. Rorin considered this mission extremely risky, but he was sent here with a personal recommendation, so he could no longer refuse. The next morning marked the day of departure. Lauren, watching the preparations, was surprised that they too would be traveling by carriages. Lapis explained that on foot they wouldn't have made it in 3 days, and besides, she had never before participated in escort missions. She was amazed that the guild managed to organize horse-drawn carriages in 1 day, and called it proof of their incredible organization, also admiring Lauren's physical condition and how easily he carried his heavy sword. Warren replied that he had long been accustomed to the weight of weapons. Lapis reminded him that he still had a bunch of other equipment. Warren agreed and asked how to arrange it all. Lapis answered that there were only 3 carriages, since 23 adventurers were involved in the mission. 8 fighters rode in the first, Sina herself and 7 other adventurers in the second, and the third, where she and Ron set off, carried the remaining 8 participants. A guild member managing the departure shouted for everyone to board quickly. The delay was already happening. Rorin agreed without arguing. He thought to himself that maybe he was too heavy for this cart. The coachman, noticing the cart was tilting, shouted that the cart was overloaded on one side and could not travel in that condition. Lapis carefully looked at the situation and said there was nothing to be done. They would have to move from this side to the opposite one. And one of the adventurers protested, unhappy that they would have to squeeze because of this. Rorin bowed his head and apologized, sincerely admitting he had nothing to say in his defense. Several adventurers just sighed calmly. Nothing could be done. Someone else offered to help with the luggage, and one of them admitted that his equipment was too heavy, so he himself took to carrying it. Thanks to their actions, the carriage leveled out, and Warren sincerely thanked everyone. One of the fighters said that they are all on the same team and must help each other as much as possible. This is the basis of teamwork. Rorin thought with surprise that there really are good people among them, but that brief feeling of relief quickly passed. After several hours on the road, Rorin, noticing something troubling, turned to Lapis and anxiously asked what was happening. Lapis, assessing the situation, bitterly realized that she could not say for sure, but was confident. In front of them was a dead person. What seemed like a simple escort mission suddenly turned into a sinister, eerie event filled with ominous premonitions. Rorin internally asked himself a difficult, troubling question. Why did this happen? Why did everything turn out this way? Memories threw him back several hours to the moment when events had just begun to unfold. Rorin politely apologized for the inconvenience, hoping that this would help resolve everything. But one of the men nearby sharply turned to him. He was outraged that Rohan could not settle in the carriage, and that this was disturbing others. His voice showed irritation, and he did not hold back, accusing Rohan of deliberately putting a spoke in others' wheels. Rorin sighed mentally. He was again in an unpleasant situation, and irritably wondered why this man was picking on him again. He was about to respond, but as soon as he started to speak, another adventurer interrupted him and rudely ordered him to be quiet. He sharply emphasized that the guild had already explained everything, and ordered him to go to his carriage without continuing the conversation. Rorin mentally noted that this guy, surrounded only by girls, looked like a typical popular boy, as if fashionable and always in demand. At that moment, Lapis thanked one of the participants for help and addressed him with the word bros. Roran repeated this name to himself. Bros, not hiding his displeasure, said that he simply did not like those who talk too much. Rorin jumped in surprise. How did she know his name? Lapis quickly explained. The guild had given a list of all quest participants in advance, so she memorized all the names and added that Rose is an iron rank adventurer who has been working in the field for 20 years. Bros ironically asked if she was deliberately trying to hurt him, and Lapis, remaining polite, assured that she had no such intentions and emphasized that among the many adventurers, only a few managed to reach the silver rank. Even though he has been in the business for 20 years, Bros has not received any serious injuries. Therefore, his skill and experience command sincere respect. Finishing her speech, she smiled and asked him if he felt awkward about her praise. Bro grumbled irritably that she was too loud and advised her to sit quieter. The guild representative ordered the coachman to prepare for departure. One of the drivers loudly announced that the road to Hansa would take 3 days. A brief, safe travels passed among the adventurers, and the squad set off. As the sun was setting, Rorin noticed the darkness thickening around. and Bro said that walking in the dark could be dangerous, so they would soon have to find a place to set up camp. But the cart ahead suddenly stopped, and Bros doubted that it was an ambush. Everything was happening quite unlike an attack, so he assumed that the cart had a technical malfunction. Lauren felt a strange, tense atmosphere ahead and decided to find out what was going on there. He approached the coachman to find out what was happening. At first, the latter said everything was fine, but then admitted he felt very nauseous and something was wrong inside. Rorin anxiously asked if the passengers in the carriage were okay. The driver assured him that they should be fine. At that moment, Bros approached closer and shouted to Rorin what had happened. Rorin reported that the coachman was ill, and Bros, becoming wary, addressed the coachman himself demanding an explanation. A voice sounded begging for help. It also reminded, before setting up camp, don't forget to spread out the mats. Loren, still not understanding what was happening, turned to the people in the carriage and asked if they were okay. He called for someone to respond, and when he did not hear a clear answer, he began opening the doors to see with his own eyes. Loren called Lapis with sharp anxiety in his voice, insisting that she come immediately. Lapis approached the scene and immediately began to examine. She noticed uneven pulse and heavy intermittent breathing in the victims, and quickly realized that the people needed to be taken out of the carriage immediately, otherwise their condition could worsen. Regarding Mrs. Senna, Lapis said, "She is simply sleeping soundly, and there are no signs of health deterioration." At that moment, one of the adventurers, Kraz, sharply intervened in the course of events. He demanded explanation sharply, accusing Rohan of slowing down the entire group's progress, and did not hide his dissatisfaction, demanding an answer here and now. Rorin did not look away, briefly and decisively apologized, said he had no time to talk, advised Crassus to get the camp in order, shouted to Bros and asked him for help, while Crassus, embarrassed, just looked and did not understand what was happening. The guys approached, trying to understand where this panic came from, and Crass roughly brushed him off in response. Bros, having found out whether the priest had medical training, glanced at Lapis. Loren, without wasting time, confirmed that the matter was indeed serious. Meanwhile, Lapis gave a preliminary medical assessment. She said that one of the men suddenly lost strength and began to have breathing problems with no signs of illness or visible injuries. The symptoms screamed. This was an abnormal, strange form of exhaustion that could not be explained by ordinary fatigue, and Lapis bitterly admitted. Regarding 2 victims, she still could not establish the exact cause of their death. In these people, the heart and breathing suddenly stopped simultaneously, without any warning signs of illness or visible injuries. Essentially, they just died as if from nowhere. The gathered adventurers exploded with outrage. They did not believe that these bodies were really dead, because in the morning everyone was completely alive, and those dead were just riding in the carriage, indistinguishable from the others. Bros, seeing the reaction, could not contain his anger and shouted loudly, not understanding what was happening. Lapis, remaining calm, suggested that Bros check her words himself. Bros approached the bodies, examined one of them, and made sure that the man was truly dead. Lapis nodded. Both bodies were hopelessly dead, and Rorin, observing everything, thought to himself that now he had to act extremely carefully. Lapis did not waste time and insisted that the bodies be burned immediately. Bros was stunned and did not understand why they would not just bury them. Lapis explained that under the current circumstances, burial was impossible. If the participants were categorically against cremation, she firmly said, the only alternative could be an immediate return to the city of Kaffa. Rose asked why such extreme measures were necessary. Lapis explained that there was a high probability the dead would soon turn into undead. Rorin, hearing this, exclaimed with shock in his voice, "This is impossible. Turning into undead usually happens through necromancy or a curse." Lapis explained with slight bitterness that sometimes the dead really rise as undead not because of external interference, but because of so-called attachment to their previous life, and added that now the important thing was no longer the cause of death, but how to properly deal with the bodies. If the participants doubted her words, then on her advice they could turn to another priest. She pointed to a group of adventurers that included Cross, the knight Layla, the sorceress Angie, and the priestess of the water god Loreu. Lapis admitted that she did not know all of Laura's abilities, but it was enough just to look at her. It was clear that she was a true priestess who could say something about this. Cress, remaining calm, said that Lapis could do whatever she wanted, but she should not interfere with their group. Laura, hearing what was happening, calmly reminded that priests are obliged to escort human souls and have no right to leave them without a ritual. She appealed to her water god, asking him to show the way and open the path for the dead. Lauren looked at her and felt that she really made the impression of a true priestess. Lapis, hearing this, smiled and asked if she herself did not look like a priestess, and Bros, not responding to this comment, inquired what conclusions she had reached. Lura carefully examined the bodies and reported that they had already been desecrated and would soon really turn into undead, and Rorin, shocked by what he heard, fought fear and horror, realizing the full seriousness of what was happening. Bros, glancing at the people around, grimly said that the situation was extremely serious and nothing could be done anymore, so he suggested first setting up camp before dark, and then starting to cremate the bodies. Rorin took the initiative, said that the bodies needed to be moved aside and asked for help, reminding that these were comrades and friends of the deceased, and at least out of respect for their memory they had to perform this last duty. Later, one of the adventurers, barely holding back emotions, said that what was happening was incomprehensible. There was no battle, no one was hurt in the skirmish, so he did not understand why their comrades suddenly turned into undead. He confidently said that the matter was in the carriage itself. After all, the dead were traveling in the second carriage, which was provided by the guild. The traveler added that after the trip in this carriage only Sina felt well, and for everyone else everything went wrong. Tension slowly grew, and Lapis, looking around carefully, said in a firm voice that it was becoming truly dangerous here. Several adventurers could not hide their fear looking at that sin. Anxiety and doubts rang in their voices. They said they felt real horror and asked each other not to look in her direction, because her gaze seemed frightening and ominous to them. Lapis, hearing this, calmly and confidently said that everyone was free to do as they saw fit, and Lauren, hesitating a little, wanted to clarify if she was really sure about that. Lapis looked at him warmly and said that she saw no reason to stop him or interfere. She admitted that her only sincere wish was to be near and walk through adventures together with him. She hopes that someday he will confess the same to her. Lapis says she never restrained his initiative and did not interfere with what he considered right, so now she asks him to continue following his choice. Rorin, hearing this, calmed down. He understood that there was no turning back, and in a sense, returning made no sense. Slightly smiling, he turned to Senna and greeted her. Then, trying to be friendly, invited her to join them at the table, saying that when you eat alone, food always tastes less good. Sina, slightly embarrassed and lowering her eyes, refused, saying that she had no appetite. Rorin quickly apologized so as not to hurt her, and gently added that she still had to eat at least a little, because another hard day lay ahead, for which strength was needed. Senna nodded and agreed, but asked anxiously if her presence would be a burden for them. Rowan, trying to calm her, said that there was no need to worry. His friend had already given full consent and had no objections, and Senna relaxed a little, thanked him, and said that then she would allow herself to move a little and join them. At that moment, Crisis sarcastically interrupted the conversation. He voiced his guess about how exactly Rorin managed to get close to the silver rank adventurer, throwing words with a hint of sycophancy. In his opinion, this is how people behave who beg for a good recommendation, or suck up for an additional reward, and he mockingly noted that it was obvious to everyone why Rorin was doing this. Rorin silently cursed. He again noticed that he had to endure Crassus's nagging, and no matter how much he tried to convince with words, nothing changed. Irritation was already growing in him. He just wanted to throw something heavy at him to stop the flow of senseless anger. He did not care what Kroos said about him personally, but he absolutely did not want Senna to hear even one harsh word from his lips. Praxis continued, saying that there was no reason for Rorin to come closer. Rorin, not letting him finish the sentence, calmly covered Sina's eyes with his hand and, to distract attention, went to get some firewood for the campfire. But Lapis, not hiding her irritation, decisively took the initiative and threw a log with all her might directly at Kroos, not letting him finish speaking. And Rorin mentally felt the blow hit right on the head. Layla, Kroos' friend and comrade, turned to them indignantly. She did not understand what was happening and why this was being done. Rorin was twisting a lapis lazuli in his hands, half smiling, and said that he wanted to find out if he could now look at her. Lapis answered affirmatively and with complete confidence in herself, explaining that everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. Then her voice became firm, and she asked Loren not to delay and to bring Miss Senna to them as soon as possible. Bros, as the organizer of the group, briefly reported to the gathered adventurers. A general council took place and everyone agreed. We continue to the city of Hansa with the same team, not returning to Kaffa. Among the adventurers, a muffled whisper was heard. One of them, with philosophical calm, said that he had long understood the risk and now simply received what he had prepared for. He noted that those who were already dead would receive no reward. He was not against continuing the mission, but categorically said that he was not going to travel next to a girl named Sina. Brow, with slight irritation, admitted that this was a problem. Rorin, looking at the scene, thought he could understand such a reaction, but he did not like it. Lapis suggested another way out. She and Rorin could ride in the carriage with Sina. She said that the night passed quietly. She and Rorin specifically settled next to Sinus' tent so that she would not be lonely, and they were with her all the time. And according to Lapis, they spent a lot of time together, and Rorin did not look sick at all. Rorin assured that he felt quite well. The guys, hearing this, asked if they were ready to ride with her in the carriage. Rorin replied that they spent the whole night with her, and if something was wrong with her, it would have already been revealed. Bro sincerely thanked them for this decision, and emphasized that it would be a great help for the whole group. Leaving the client without escort was extremely undesirable. He then asked if there would be enough remaining carriages for the adventurers who were still left, but added that after recent events no one would agree to ride in a dark carriage anyway. He insisted that any change of condition or incident be reported immediately, emphasizing that if something bad happened to them, it would not ease the situation of the others in any way. Lapis was the first to greet Senna. Senna looked at them reservedly but warmly, and called them brother and sister. Rorin approached her and suggested going together. He also turned to this coachman and asked if everything was all right. The coachman, hesitating, confirmed that he felt acceptable. Rowan mentally realized that the driver still looked unwell. Although it was only the second day of the journey, many problems had already accumulated, and most travelers were depressed and discouraged. It seemed to him that something serious was bound to happen ahead. Bros gave the order to take positions, turned to Rorin and Lapis, and sternly warned, "Stay alert, and from now on be even more vigilant." Tsena, with a slight tremor in her voice, sought reassurance and asked if everything would be all right. Lapis reassured her. Everything would be fine. Their group had a very strong mercenary, and Rorin asked in surprise if it was him. Lapis smiled and said that of course it was about him. There was no one else in their squad who was called the Wind Cutter. Roraine was a bit embarrassed and said there was no point in deceiving oneself. He was not the person called by that nickname. He added that he was often mistaken for that man, but he himself had no nickname. Lapis asked with interest if he knew the real Wind Cutter. Rorin explained in a quiet voice that he did not personally know that man. Whoever met him on the battlefield did not survive, so he always carefully avoided being among those who fought him. Lapis asked with a barely noticeable sneer if he was often called slow-witted. Rorin honestly admitted that it happened, and Lapis quietly nodded, calmly deciding that he was probably indeed a bit slow. A few more hours crawled by and Lapis, already bored, noticed that nothing interesting had happened all this time. The driver announced that he would soon look for a place to stop and rest, and Loren, looking at the road, mentally noted how quickly time had flown. Suddenly the coachman loudly noticed that someone was standing ahead on the road, and decided that they were probably just ordinary travelers. Rowan agreed to approach and check the situation, and Bros, who was walking behind, quickly explained what had happened. Rowan saw that people were indeed standing in the middle of the road and blocking the way, but there was something off about their behavior and appearance. Rorin, looking more closely, noticed that at first glance they looked like ordinary townspeople, but something about it was unsettling. There should have been no villages or towns here. One of the adventurers, angry about the delay, loudly addressed those standing, demanding they clear the way and reminding them that they were slowing down the movement. Lauren, watching what was happening, became worried and warned everyone that there was clearly something wrong with these people. He asked them to be especially careful. And at that moment, the irreparable happened. One of the people standing on the road suddenly bit a traveler. When the road suddenly turned into a commotion, the adventurers tried to react in alarm. One of them shouted, demanding the attacker release his companion, and the panic only grew. No one could understand why the person who looked completely ordinary was clinging with such force and fury. Rose immediately rushed to help pull the man out, but even he had to strain considerably. He looked at the scene confusedly, admitting that something was wrong with these people, and began to doubt whether they were even alive. At that moment, a clear and confident voice of Luru sounded. "Those standing before them are the undead." Rose recoiled, stunned and surprised. It was daylight outside. The sun was shining brightly. This could not be, so he ordered everyone to take combat positions. Crass, full of confidence, said that zombies were no match for him. Layla, standing nearby, quickly warned him not to stray too far. Angie, restrained and prudent, reminded that her magical energy was low and asked if Crass was really sure he would not need help. Bros nodded and allowed him to go, but immediately indicated to Lauren that Crass might still need treatment. Crass focused and mentally decided that he needed to cut off the attacker's limb as soon as possible. It was strange to fight those who looked like ordinary people, but he reminded himself that these creatures had long ceased to be human, struck with icy determination, and finished the attack with a short phrase. Meanwhile, Layla noticed that these opponents behaved differently. They were not just zombies. Loren nodded and added that they were most likely revenants. Lapis, with a sword in her hands, turned to Rorin and offered to join the fight. She had deliberately brought his weapon, and Rorin assessed the situation and replied that it seemed everything was under control, and his help was not needed right now. Lapis, trying to lift the sword, complained that it was too heavy, and admitted that only Rorin could carry such a weapon. And Rorin looked at her and waved it off. No need to suffer like that. And his participation in the fight was really unnecessary now. Watching Cross, he felt that this was a man for whom any help would only get in the way. This is a sign of an adventurer of iron rank. He switched the conversation to Revenants, and asked what was known about them. Lapis explained that a Revenant is a much more dangerous type of undead than zombies or ordinary humans. The name comes from the words, the one who returned, and they appear for the same reasons as zombies, due to attachment to the world of the living, sometimes by the will of a higher undead, sometimes through living magic. Such creatures are more dangerous than zombies, but still not stronger than a living person. Over time, as the body decays, their strength fades. But if a revenant is fueled by a higher undead, or receives magical support, it can not only retain fragments of its mind, but also surpass the abilities it had in life. She briefly summarized. Revenants are more dangerous than zombies, and, if there are many of them, can become a real threat even to adventurers of iron rank. Loren, reflecting on what he heard, could not believe it. If this was really so, it was unclear how more than a dozen such creatures could have ended up right here, in the middle of the road. He recalled that there were neither cemeteries nor signs of battle nearby. This led him to think that perhaps even more powerful undead were hiding nearby. And when it came to more powerful undead, everything was no less confusing and complicated than with living people. Of all the more powerful undead he knew, only vampires came to mind. Revenants themselves are not the first reason for fear. Bros asked what he meant. Loren said he had seen one of the creatures bite an adventurer. Rose explained that the bite was not deep thanks to his protective gear, but fragments of teeth still stuck in his hand. He added that there was still one enemy left. Crass looked at him and lightly rushed forward. The brothers, watching this, exclaimed in surprise, "What just happened?" Press, having finished the fight, calmly said that it was all over. Angie, indignantly, asked him once again what he meant by those words. Layla, irritably, said that Cress had decided to show off again. Angie inwardly called him a complete idiot. Layla reminded him that she had asked not to use this skill for trivial matters, especially without permission. Praz sharply dismissed their reproaches, saying that he saw nothing wrong with it. Lura, trying to restrain him, reminded him that it was unknown who might be watching, and it was not worth revealing one's abilities unnecessarily. Angie called him a fool again, reminding him that he had already won without it, and Cress wanted to say something but remained silent. Bros, embarrassed, aloud wondered why Cressus suddenly flared up and disappeared like lightning, and added that he could not help but notice it. Roar admitted that, well, he noticed. He thought that if it had been his first experience with such an attack, he probably would not have been able to parry it. Cross's speed was stunning, and the blow had such force that it cut the Revenant in half. Rorin again aloud wondered what it could have been. Lapis understood what he meant, and turned to Bros. Bros asked with interest if she knew this skill, and Lapis nodded and explained that as a servant of the god of knowledge, it was most likely an enhancement technique. Bros asked if it was magic. Lapis explained. Although enhancement is similar to supportive magic, it is different. Supportive magic temporarily increases abilities, while enhancement is an innate gift that strengthens the user themselves and the objects or creatures it is applied to. Bros admitted that it sounded very convenient. Lapis added that it was an extremely rare gift, and those who possessed it often became what people called the brave and the heroes. Roar tried in his thoughts to understand the difference between the brave and the hero. Lapis understood that Cress was most likely connected with the Adventurers Guild and possibly under government surveillance. Something roared inside him, and he added that such a gift would be perfect for a self-satisfied dandy, and said that he did not care, because after this matter, they most likely would not cross paths again. Lapis asked in surprise what he was going to do. Rorin, calmly looking ahead, replied that nothing sharp would happen for now, but they needed to take care of the bodies. Leaving them as they were would be barbaric, and Lapis agreed, admitting that Roran was right. Tension among the adventurers was growing and turning into panic, and someone finally voiced what many had already thought. Maybe it was time to return to Kaffa. He said that unnatural things were happening on this mission. People were dying for no reason. As if by snapping fingers, the undead attacked in broad daylight, and the overall situation was oppressive and deeply disturbing. He believed that the task had become too strange, and that was probably why the messengers of the previous guilds had disappeared. He suggested not to flee, but to return to the guild, gather again, and reconsider everything, but reminded that it seemed everyone had previously agreed to continue the task. Another adventurer countered. The decision had already been made before the returnees themselves arrived, so now everything had changed. Penalties for refusing the mission seemed trivial compared to the real threat. He recalled with pain in his voice how many comrades they had already lost and asked himself if anyone would compensate them for these losses. Braz, trying to maintain order, asked everyone to calm down. He reminded that everyone had voluntarily agreed to participate in this dangerous affair and understood the possible consequences. He said that now they were much closer to the Hansa than to Takafa, so it was more logical to move forward. Upon arrival, everyone would receive the promised reward, and those who still disagreed could have another conversation and a repeat vote. One of the adventurers decisively said that he was not going to retreat. He had not joined the group to return empty-handed, and even less to become cannon fodder for the rebels. He admitted that this mission was the scariest in his life, and that now he would receive a huge reward, even for those who had already died. And in response, someone remarked that brave words were worthless if a person was wounded. He sharply replied that his left hand was fine, and he was still in the ranks, and another participant declared that he also would not return. Not so much for the reward, but so that the death of friends would not be in vain. Bros summed up, "If there are no more objections, let's move." And Rorin, deeply thoughtful, voiced his concerns. He was especially worried about the origin of the rebels. He had examined their belongings before the burial, but found nothing that could give even a hint. They only had ordinary wallets, simple jewelry, and other trinkets typical for ordinary people. The guys, hearing this, thought that perhaps these creatures had been the most ordinary inhabitants of some ordinary settlement before turning into the undead. Rorin agreed, but grimly reminded that there was no village or city nearby from which those creatures could have come, and without understanding their origin, it was impossible to choose a safe path. So in his opinion, it was smartest to move extremely cautiously. One of the adventurers, turning to Crassus, loudly expressed his admiration. Now he saw him in a completely different light. He instantly dealt with the undead, and his presence filled the group with confidence in their safety. Rorin sarcastically thought to himself that in front of him was a typical idiot. Bruce attracted the group's attention and asked if there were any objections. When no one answered, he ordered to move on, reminded that only one day remained until the city of Hansa and everyone needed to be on alert. And he himself was surprised to realize that he was already behaving like the leader of this mission. Rorin, with a barely noticeable smile, said that it was a bit late for such revelations. Lapis, noticing his effort, warmly thanked him for his work. Rorin apologized to the coachman for the delay, to which he responded reservedly that everything was fine. Rorin mentally admitted to himself that if he had known in advance what he would have to go through, he would probably have seriously thought about returning to Kaffa. Suddenly, one of the adventurers screamed. He stood in shock and refused to believe what was happening. He desperately shouted that he did not want to become food for these creatures. His voice broke as the dead attacked and began tearing him to pieces. Thus began the second night in the camp. Rorin, assessing the situation, stated that this was not just a matter of caution. The problem was that there were too many enemies. The camp was attacked again by Revenants, and Crassus, finding himself in the very midst of the battle, shouted that there were too many of them and he could not handle it alone. Rorin, turning to Lapis, tried to find out if all the enemies were rebels. Lapis, carefully examining the battlefield, replied that most of them were zombies. Rorin noticed this and, turning to the rest, asked them to stay behind. He himself took a step forward. Sina, looking at him with fear, uttered his name anxiously, and Lapis instantly calmed her, promising that he would be fine. Rorin, raising his huge sword, with tired irony remarked that it was hard to believe. With this blade he would have to cut rotten flesh, but firmly gripping the weapon, he began to smash zombies with strength and precision, making his way through the darkness of the second night. Loren, feeling how the weight of the sword became part of his body, looked at his weapon with sincere admiration and admitted that it was a damn magnificent sword, as if made just for him. Rose, watching how easily he wielded the huge blade, could not contain her surprise. He exclaimed, noting how effortlessly Loren swung that huge metal monster. Loren, brushing off the praise, remarked that one could get used to it. He inquired about Rose's condition, worried that he had sustained some injuries. Rose, gathering his courage, assured that he was fine, but instantly shifted the conversation to something more important. What they would do next, because the runny nose appeared literally out of nowhere, and there was no way to explain it at all. Lapis, listening to the conversation, said that all this happens because they are the only living ones in this area, and Rorin picked up her thought, adding that the dead flocked to them like moths to a flame. He said he did not want to force a decision, but still asked Bros whether he would go forward or turn back. Bros, as if feeling the weight of responsibility, muttered that he did not consider himself a leader. Rora calmly noted that he himself did not intend to take the final decision. Bros, gathering his last strength into a fist, confidently said that they needed to go to Hansa. Everything they had already been through did not give them the right to retreat, and Roar also agreed, noting that Hansa was closer than Kaffa, so the chances of survival there would be greater. Bros expressed doubt that the entire city could fall. Rorin turned to Lapis, seeking to know her opinion. Lapis replied that she had no specific objections. He roared, and with that summed it all up. If no one else had a different opinion, then so be it. He asked if there was at least one cart left suitable for the future journey, and Lapis confirmed that they managed to find one intact cart, but the problem was that it had only one empty spot. Roaring explained that it was caused by zombies, and Lapis explained that zombies and revenants do not attack horses. They only attack those who resemble what they were like in life. Bros sadly said that the rest of the horses had already been taken. The coachman of the first and third carriages had driven them away and disappeared. He tried to stop them, but in vain, and Rorin admitted that in this situation it was unavoidable. He loudly declared that he would deal with the nearest undead himself, ordered the boys to harness the remaining horses to the cart, asked Lapis to take San and prepare to depart, and then asked if the driver of the second cart was still alive. Santa, with anxiety in her voice, said that she recently saw him nearby among the trees. They approached and she pointed at him. Lapus, squinting, said with sadness in her voice that the coachman had already begun to turn into an undead, and Rorin, gritting his teeth, mentally reproached himself. He knew he was feeling unwell, but had ignored it, and now sadly thought he would not be able to conduct this person properly. Bros reported that the cart was ready, but none of the other people knew how to operate it, and he himself admitted that he had never done it before. Lapis stepped forward and, lightly smiling, said that it was time for the priestess of the god of knowledge to intervene. Bros, impressed, said with respect that she was a true jack of all trades, if she also knew how to drive the cart. Lapis smiled and turned to Sana to check if she was comfortable. Sana nodded slightly, indicating that everything was fine, and then Lapis asked Rorin to hurry. Everyone was already ready to move. Rorin shouted loudly to the survivors to gather everyone, and announced that they would break through to the city of Hansa, bitterly noting that it seemed no one else was alive except them. Crass smiled mockingly and said that he had never imagined. Of all the participants, Roran survived. He called him a little bastard, as if he could not come to terms with it. Roran smiled and noticed that Crass used the same phrase, as if unconsciously repeating after him, and quietly smiled to himself. He remembered calling the survivors to gather, and had to admit that the strange coincidence when Crass responded was unexpected but pleasant luck. Crass, wasting no time, confirmed that he heard the intention to move to Hansa, immediately asking if Rorin had any plan of action. Rorin calmly but firmly replied that he had no clear plan, and if Crass did not like it, he should suggest another way himself. Layla intervened, trying to ease the tension, and said that now was not the time to argue. Laura supported her, emphasizing that they needed to act together, otherwise they would be exhausted not only physically but also emotionally if they continued to fight each other. Lauren, not wanting to waste a minute, asked everyone who was supposed to go with them to hurry. He said that only one cart remained, which they planned to use to reach Hansa, but at that moment something unexpected happened. He shouted loudly for everyone to lie down, sensing danger. Crass turned around and stared into the fog of horror, and his gaze instantly turned to Angie. Loren, seeing the creature, was stunned. A monster appeared before them, incredible and frightening. He asked what kind of creature it was. Lapis quickly assessed the situation and determined it was a bone dragon. She added that now not only zombies but also similar creatures were on the loose. Angie, watching how events unfolded, reproached herself. She admitted that she had been careless. Although her body remained intact, she felt that she had no right to allow others to suffer because of her mistake. She knew that if they delayed too long, zombies would start filling the area again. Her main goal was to give Crass a chance to survive and break free. Angie, with desperate determination, shouted to Layla and Laura, "Grab Cross and run immediately!" And Cross, hearing this, was outraged. He did not understand why she was giving such orders. Bros was already urging others on, shouting for them to quickly jump into the cart. They had to leave immediately, but Cross refused. He could not and did not want to leave his girlfriend and firmly declared that he would never leave Angie and would follow her. Layla, realizing the futility of what was happening, objected. In her opinion, they could not cope with this monster. At least in their condition, they had no chance. Laura begged Cross to think about her life. Rorin silently watched the conversation, and Lapis sighed and with a barely noticeable smirk, said that this was starting to sound like a harem cliché, advised Rorin to simply use the power of friendship. because according to the logic of such stories, everything somehow gets resolved, and then ironically asked what they were going to do at all. Rorin mentally recalled that his first impression of Cress was not very pleasant. There was no sympathy, and at one point he even thought that leaving him behind might be a good idea. But at the same time, he fully understood what it meant to lose loved ones. This feeling was too familiar to him, so he could not just allow it to happen. Lapis, noticing this, smiled kindly and said that was exactly why she could not hate him. Rorin's heart fully responded to her words. He truly knew what it meant to cling to someone who was leaving. Assessing the situation, he understood. Defeating such a monster as a bone dragon was impossible, especially since they were ordinary mercenaries, not heroes or knights from legends, but he knew that if they did not act now, the girl's life would be in danger. Lapis explained, "Bone dragons do not need to eat flesh or blood to survive. They feed on negativity, suffering, despair, and sadness, which is why this dragon did not kill the girl immediately. It slowly bit into her flesh, extracting every drop of fear and pain from her. She added that there was no more time, and that on the count of 3 she would use magic to distract the beast. At that moment, Rorin had to act. Rorin noticed with surprise that he had so far believed Lapis could only heal. Lapis cheerfully replied that she had just mastered a new skill and now she had something fresh, like it had just come out of a magical oven, and Rorin, hearing this, nodded and agreed. Lapis focused and began to pronounce the magical words. Her voice was firm. "In the name of the Master, let the sacred light shine." Pras watched with admiration as energy thickened around her. Loru recognized this spell and confirmed that it only works on evil creatures, even on the undead. Lapis decisively spoke the name of her new power, the magic of purification. At that moment, Rorin stepped forward and struck with his huge sword as the light merged with the blade. Together, they rushed into battle. Rorin, gripping the sword hilt, concentrated and mentally ordered himself to destroy the foundation, to annihilate the core of this monster. At that moment, Lapis, full of determination, activated the spell and released a deadly lure, accompanying it with a fierce scream that carried pure rage and the desire to finish off the enemy. Rorin, wasting no time, sharply turned and ordered him not to slow down, and at the same moment shouted to Lapis, "Return to the carriage immediately." Lapis replied that she understood and instantly took the wounded with her, following him without hesitation. Ron tensely watched the enemy's movements. He noticed that the dragon's legs, which had recently been destroyed, had already recovered, and a troubling thought flashed through his mind. Perhaps it would chase again. He roared, bent down, and silently cursed the monster, calling it a vile creature. The only consolation was that the enemy was entirely made of bones and probably could not fly. Still, a swarm of thoughts raged in his head, giving him no peace. Dragons fly thanks to magic, so wings are rather an auxiliary element, and he tried to understand whether a bone dragon was capable of flying. Lapis, without taking her eyes off the road, remarked that the undead are too primitive to consciously use magic. Most likely, this dragon did not have such an ability either. But she immediately added that in this situation it does not matter. The carriage with horses is already moving slowly and cannot speed up. Meanwhile, the monster is gradually approaching, and Cress, worried about Engi's condition, asked to slow down a bit to make it easier for her. She stood up, angry, sharply cut him off. "Idiot!" And he warned that the slightest delay would definitely allow the dragon to catch them, and eventually they would all die, and then bitterly added that in that case they would probably be called martyrs, but only after death. Rorin, ignoring the quarrel, asked if there was a tall sanctuary nearby, and Loru gloomily replied that if anyone still knew how to use magic, let them continue to support NG until they completely exhausted their strength. Bros returned to Rorin, trying to understand if he really realized. By confronting such an enemy, they were doomed. He persistently emphasized that without the power of a higher adept, they had no chance, and wondered what Rorin was even capable of. Rorin fearlessly and without doubt admitted that they had lost this battle from the very beginning. He had no illusions. Whatever they did, the outcome was already decided. Crass, with despair in his voice, reminded them that the nearest sanctuary was on the other side of their path. Rorin decisively and without a shadow of doubt said that even if they all died, he forbade anyone to stray from the road. Their task was to reach the end. Rorin clenched his teeth to himself. Darkness lay before him. Rain clouds hid the sky, but finally they began to disperse, and the light of the full moon illuminated the road. He raised his gaze. The bone dragon was still chasing them. At that moment, Rorin addressed his companions and sternly warned, "Under no circumstances reduce speed." Lapis nodded. She confirmed that she understood everything. And suddenly, Rorin noticed how she skillfully maneuvered around one of the trees. He froze in surprise. realizing that it was not accidental but intentional, and recalled that once she had prosthetics instead of eyes. He turned to her and whispered with sincere amazement that she could really see. Lapis, with a slight but confident smile, replied that she could see, and even more than ever, clearly, distinctly, and unmistakably. Rory noted that the situation was extremely strange. He wondered why no one else noticed the obvious. The threat was so apparent and suspicious that everyone should be informed. Moreover, the bone dragon had excellent night vision. Even if it turned out otherwise, he insisted, rely on instinct and intuition. Only the inner feeling will indicate which path to choose at this critical moment and help understand what to do next. Lapis, looking at the carriage passengers, threw out a sudden and harsh idea. With cold irony, she suggested simply throwing the red-haired stupid boy out of the carriage, and Warren immediately understood whom she meant, asking if she meant Cress. Lapis smiled and said, "Could it be anyone else? There was no other such naive, inexperienced, red-haired, overgrown child here." Cross, hearing this, froze and looked embarrassedly at Lapis. He was trying to understand what was happening with Angie. Luru, overwhelmed by stress, said that she could no longer use healing magic, and therefore could not help Angie right now. Cress, with despair in his voice, rushed to his friend, begging her not to die, to hold on, and pleading with her not to leave him. Rorin, realizing that panic would only worsen the situation, sternly reminded them not to lose their fighting spirit in the middle of the battle. Cress, seeing Rorin approaching, shouted, trying to understand what he was going to do. Rorin seemed indifferent to the protests. He calmly said that he did not consider it necessary to explain anything, and then sharply ordered Crassus to move. Cress, completely unprepared for this, shouted in confusion, not understanding why this was happening to him, but he did not have time to finish speaking. The next moment, Lapis sharply threw him forward right onto the horse. Crassus panicked in midair. He realized that if he fell, he would either end up under the wheels of the cart or be crushed by the horse. Upon landing, he shouted and angrily attacked his comrades, not understanding what they were doing. Lapis, without blinking, explained that she had a gift she could enhance, and she said to use it on the horse to speed up the cart, because if they did not do everything possible now, the dragon would catch up with them, and then it would be the end for all of them. Cress, still not quite understanding, shouted that Lapis was proposing to use force against a living creature. Lapis raised her voice and sharply replied that there was no time for arguments. It was not the time to moralize. They had to act immediately, otherwise the bone dragon would turn them all into mince. Cress, looking at those who were trying to save him, asked himself the only real question. Could he allow these people to die? He realized that even if his efforts changed nothing, he could not stand aside, and so he activated his power. The carriage suddenly gained speed, and Roran, feeling a powerful jerk, noticed with surprise how rapidly they accelerated. Lapis, looking ahead, decisively ordered to speed up. There was no time to rest. They would have to move without stops until dawn. Roran asked what would change in the morning. Lapis replied that the bone dragon was a type of undead, vulnerable to sunlight. When the sun rose, its power would greatly weaken, and it would no longer be able to continue the pursuit, so this was their chance to escape. Layla turned to Crass and shouted at him as if waiting for confirmation. Bros, still stubborn, reminded about the supreme sanctuary. Senna, whose voice was still trembling, whispered, addressing Loren, calling him brother. Rorin said with a heavy look that despite all this, at least now they have a chance to survive. It may not be the best option, but death is definitely not what they need. Rorin woke up, breathing heavily, noticed that it was morning outside, and with bitter relief realized they barely managed to escape from the pursuers, though not without losses, but the result was positive. Loreu, noticing that he had regained consciousness, quietly greeted him and ironically added that probably the dragon has 9 lives. Loreen looked around and said that Senna had just fallen asleep. Her breathing was even, and that calmed him down a bit. He murmured mentally about the condition of the others, but what interested him most passionately was what was happening with Bros. Layla, standing nearby, quietly replied that she could not say anything certain. Very little time had passed since their escape, and with each hour Browse's condition only worsened. Rorin asked if they had tried to heal him. Layla sadly explained that Luru really did everything possible to save the boys, but it gave no result, so she had to allow Luru to rest a little. As for Angie, her condition also remained critical. Even after the second healing attempt, there was no improvement. The wounds were too many and too deep, and Layla admitted that she could not say for sure whether Angie was alive. According to her, she rather resembled not a person, but a dead body. Roaring thought and realized that the reason why 2 from their squad immediately fell out of the fight was still unknown. Mentally, he noted that fate had not been very kind to them. Lapis cheerfully approached him, noticing that he was already awake, and with a barely noticeable smile said that this morning was simply incredible, as if mocking the recent events. Rorin glanced at the cart and, fortunately, noticed that the horse was fine. Then his eyes slid along the road. He tried to orient himself and asked how much longer to the Hansa. Lapis admitted that she did not know for sure, but believed, if they had not gotten lost, the road to the city should be straight without forks. Rorin confidently said that if the route did not change, everything would be fine. Lapis added that although their journey could not be called an ordinary walk, she sincerely hoped that nothing terrible would happen ahead. Rorin nodded, said he was glad to see her okay, reminded that the night before she mentioned fabrics, and asked him to bring as many as possible. Lapis narrowed her eyes and mockingly accused him of lying, jokingly saying that maybe some men like it when cute and beautiful girls hit them. But Rorin, not giving in to her teasing, confidently replied that he did not have such an attraction. Lapis confessed with relief that it was for the best, otherwise she would have been extremely embarrassed. Then she addressed him by name and asked if he could lead the horse straight. Rorin asked her to move a little to let him sit in front, admitting that he barely slept all night and was incredibly tired. Lapis moved aside, freed the space, handed him the reins, and showed him where it was best for him to settle. Roar mentally noted that the two-person beds turned out to be cramped, and quietly suggested to us, if she needed to rest, it would be better to move to the roof of the carriage. It would be more comfortable for her there. Lapis refused, saying that she was quite cozy here. Warren looked at her and smiled, thinking that this was not entirely true, but he did not argue further. Roran mentally noted that although they quickly left the danger zone, the feeling of safety was still fragile, and he could not say for sure whether they were really safe now or just postponed the inevitable. At that moment, something moved nearby. The sun began to move. He looked at her in surprise and quietly noticed that she had woken up. Her voice was weak and confused. She called him, calling him brother. Meanwhile, something disturbing was happening in the carriage. Everyone inside clearly felt unwell. The air was becoming heavy, and Loren could no longer stand it. He suddenly shouted, trying to understand what was going on. He was sure it was not a curse, but what was happening clearly went beyond the usual. Senna, trembling, turned to him and asked what to do now, and Rohan bitterly said that whatever actions they took, they still could not help. Even healing magic was powerless in this situation. They had only to move forward, hoping that sooner or later they would reach the city. Lapis firmly said that Hansa was already very close, and Roran, doubting, tried to find out why he was so sure. Lapis explained that earlier, when her father came here on business, she often walked around the outskirts of Hansa and remembered the local landscapes very well. And now before their eyes unfolded exactly the landscape that, according to her memories, was here before the city appeared. Rowan sighed with relief. It was the best news in a long time. He hoped this was their chance to survive. Lapis warned him not to be too optimistic. She said she felt something strange. The air seemed to vibrate with tension. She warned that something bad had happened here, and they needed to be ready. If necessary, they would have to fight. He roared, then froze, staring ahead. What appeared before their eyes did not fit his idea of the city. What he saw was completely abnormal. He bitterly said that if this was a city, it was not at all what they expected. Lapis was frozen in shock. She could not understand what had happened, but it was clear that something was definitely wrong. The city gates were wide open. There were no guards, not a single passerby, and complete silence reigned where life usually bustled. She noticed, if the gates had been closed, one might have thought that the entire garrison had gone on a campaign, perhaps to drive the undead out of Dragonmere. But all the gates were wide open, and this only heightened her anxiety. Roran, observing what was happening, excitedly said that it was no longer clear what to do next. Lapis tried to remain calm, thinking aloud about the options. Despite the possibility of a zombie attack, the completely empty city could still be valuable. She said with hope in her voice that they would manage to replenish the supplies and give everyone at least a little rest, but immediately added that they have no right to abandon those who are now left in the wheelchair and cannot walk independently. Roran, turning to Senna, looked at her with tenderness and firm determination. In her behavior, he saw her true essence, the one that does not let her retreat even in the most difficult conditions. He promised that he would not let them perish. He will overcome this trial, no matter the cost. They stepped into the city, strangely quiet and abandoned. Lapis immediately noticed that the streets were empty. There was not a soul around, and no traces of a recent battle. He insisted that there were no destructions or any signs of a brutal fight here, and added that none of this resembled a zombie invasion. Roran noticed a strange detail. Although there were no people at all, the city looked as if someone was still taking care of it. He openly shared his feelings and admitted that it was becoming increasingly anxious. Lapis, trying to lighten the mood, added that the image of two travelers alone in an empty, silent city is extremely romantic and can even be pleasant. Rorin was not enthusiastic and responded to the remark weakly, and Lapis, considering it inappropriate at that moment, admitted that she had joked a little and laughed quietly. Rowan turned his gaze aside, pointed at him, and patiently waited for explanations. Lapis looked at Cross and suggested that he might need to be lowered, but immediately added that she did not want to touch him at all. Roar agreed with this reluctance and added that he himself would try to avoid contact if he could. Lapis said with sadness in her voice that she felt sorry for the horse. It was clearly in trouble, and Ron reminded that there were 4 people in their carriage, barely alive, so he suggested postponing this and first finding a hospital. Lapis agreed with this proposal and immediately asked Sena if she knew where a hospital might be in this city. After a short pause, Sena confidently indicated the direction where, in her opinion, they should go. Accepting her direction, Lapis suggested the whole group move in the indicated direction. Rorin, taking the reins, said he could only go straight and therefore handed the reins to Lapis, who thanked him for the temporary substitution and noted that it was helpful. When they reached the building, Rorin looked at it with distrust and said it seemed too small for a city hospital. And Sena asked in surprise what the problem was. Lapis explained that this was not a city hospital, and with a note of surprise remarked that the daughter of the ruler Hans knew about this small clinic. She decided that Sena's father had probably brought her here to his trusted private doctor. Santa confirmed that the doctor was indeed an outstanding specialist, and said that her dad always brought her here. Hearing this, Lauren noted, in her opinion, the mayor chose a private doctor to treat his daughter, not a public clinic, and he found this very strange. Lapis suggested that perhaps now this was even a safer option. She did not want to go to public institutions until she had full information about what was happening in the city. Loren, noticing her fatigue, wanted to find out what these suspicions were based on. Lapis said anxiously that she could not say anything for sure yet, asked Rorin to pull the injured out of the carriage, and turned to their companion with a request to help. Cress lifted his head with difficulty and said he needed to rest a little because they had largely escaped from the dragon thanks to his actions. Lapis decisively reminded him who exactly saved Angie from the dragon and emphasized, it was Mr. Rorin. Press, having felt this, reluctantly acknowledged Lauren's merits and, though hesitantly, thanked him. Rorin glanced at the chaos and said that the rescue was not yet complete. Instead of empty talk, they needed to focus on moving the injured into the clinic building, and Cross, somewhat recovered, agreed, stating that he was ready to start work immediately. Rorin, recalling recent events, admitted that that night his priestess mercilessly whipped the crosses, and he did not show obvious displeasure. Press reacted with obvious surprise. No one understood what was meant. Rorin suggested that perhaps Crassus was simply enjoying it, but Crassus loudly objected. That was not the case at all. I am an ordinary person. Rorin, calm, only remarked that in that case it would be normal to ask the priestess to stop. Lapis intervened, saying that Kraz would have recovered even without such a push. Rorin smiled and replied that it was not about the method. He just found the whole situation very funny. Rorin said that it was all over. Lapis asked if they managed to get everyone down. Rorin said the work was finished and added that supplies were still left on the carts. Although there were few, among the things they found food, and that was worth its weight in gold in their situation. Lapis said with relief that she had one more good news. Although the clinic was private, there were decent stocks of medicine there, which were just right for their needs. Press reminded Lapis that she was a priestess and asked if she had any medical knowledge. Lapis agreed that she knew a little about medicine and confidently said that Laura also had appropriate training. Press explained that Laura actually knew the laws well, and Angie was the real medic in their group. He added that right now Angie needed help, admitted that he himself could not cope, and sincerely thanked Lapis for her help. Lapis looked around and decided that she could quite help the injured recover, so she took on one patient. Roan suggested that she hurry. It would be a shame to come all this way and lose someone right at the threshold of rescue. Lapis said that the men should leave the room during the treatment because she needed to start medical procedures. She managed to do something useful during this time. Cress indignantly asked if she really was asking him to leave because the injured were his friends. Lapis calmly explained, she's going to start a procedure during which 3 girls will have to undress, and added that Crass is unlikely to want to watch this. Does he really want to see their naked bodies? Crass blushed and began to justify himself, saying that it was not like that at all. Lapis couldn't hold back. She said that maybe she would also have to undress Mr. Brose, and sarcastically added that looking at naked middle-aged men was some kind of refined hobby of Crass. Cross froze at this suggestion and barely whispered that he hadn't said anything like that, and Lapis waved his hand, asking him to be quiet so as not to distract them from preparations. Rorin also decided to step aside and said something, and Lapis turned to him gratefully and suggested that he and Senna inspect the surroundings together, sincerely doubting whether it was worth entrusting this to Crass. She added that it would also seem like a bad idea for him to take care of Senna, and insisted that the girl would be safer next to Rorin. Rorin asked if Lapis wanted Senna to stay at home. Lapis calmly reminded her that during treatment patients would have to be undressed, not only women, and added that the sight of naked Mr. Bros could psychologically traumatize Senna. Rorin, hearing this, exclaimed in surprise, "Undressed completely naked?" Lapis explained, in their situation nothing terrible would happen if the men just walked around the perimeter. She reminded that Senna is local and probably knows the surroundings well, so this could come in handy. Rorin agreed with her words and admitted that she was right. Lapis asked if she could count on him. Rorin promised to return as soon as he felt the situation was becoming dangerous. Lapis wished them luck and hopefully added that she would wait for their return. Senna quietly said that she was going with Rorin. Lapis, left alone with the task, felt a slight tension and began to think where to start, and Crass, though clumsy, encouraged her and asked her to begin. Loren approached the exit and suggested Senna go. Senna humbly confirmed her readiness, called him brother, and joined him. Rowan looked down the street, which he assumed was once a market street, and noticed the vegetables on the stalls were dried and spoiled but not yet rotten. So this happened recently. All the shops were intact. There were no traces of fighting, no destruction or disorder anywhere. In some houses, there was even uneaten food, as if people had left everything in panic and fled somewhere. But no sign of an attack was found, and Sen, looking around, could not hide his amazement at what had happened to the city's inhabitants. She was worried about where they could have disappeared to. Rorin remarked aloud that if the townspeople had really fled in panic or evacuated en masse, they would hardly have left their belongings and food, because all the valuables and household items remained untouched, as if the people had suddenly evaporated, taking nothing with them. Then he asked Senna if she knew how many people usually lived in this city. Senna was confused and said she could not give an exact number, and Rorin estimated in his mind that given the size of the city and the scale of the buildings, there should be about 30 to 50,000 people here. He wondered if these people had dissolved into the air like smoke. It seemed incredible, but he decided that upon returning to Kaifa, he would definitely tell the Adventurers Guild about this, although he doubted they would believe him. He added that people cannot just disappear without a trace. In any case, there should have been at least drops of blood, bodies, or other signs of what had happened. Sina quietly addressed him, calling him brother, and Roran realized he had been too upset and apologized. She replied that it was all right, but admitted that she herself was increasingly worried, especially because there was no news about the father and the rest of the villagers. Rowan again mentally returned to the assumption. If the father and other townspeople were alive, most likely they had hidden in the castle, or in the main residence, which stood right in the very center of the city. He saw that Hansa was within the rings of walls, but it still seemed as if those fortifications were not meant for fighting inside the city. The main street to the residence could be passed without any obstacles. He admitted to himself that if there was a chance, he would gladly inspect the castle soon. But he understood that out of the 7 people nearby, only 3 could act right now, and that created a dangerous situation. He decided it was safer to wait until the other 4 recovered before starting a full-scale operation, but he still doubted whether he would have enough time. Senna noticed his piercing gaze and asked what had happened. Roran felt as if someone was watching him and reported that someone was nearby, suggesting it could be either a person or a monster. Sina pointed with her finger to the side and said she had noticed movement. Loren stopped her and spoke loudly. He introduced himself as a traveler who arrived in Hansa with an important matter and said he was now trying to figure out what was happening. He turned to the stranger and demanded to know who she was and what had happened in the city. The girl, tired and frightened, whispered that she needed help, and Loren asked if she was from here. The girl nodded and confirmed where she was from, and he calmly but firmly said that he wanted to know exactly what happened here, where all the residents disappeared to, and why she was here alone. And the girl explained that a few days ago everyone started behaving strangely. Fear of what was happening drove her into the basement where she hid, but the food supplies ran out and she had to go outside. Roran asked if she had family, and the girl said her parents had died, and she was completely alone, after which he asked another important question: if there was anyone in the city she knew or had seen. The girl admitted that she did not know, but suddenly looked at Sena in surprise and asked if she was the master's daughter, and Roran did not deny it, and admitted that it was quite possible that Senna was really his daughter. The girl reported with enthusiasm that the main inhabitants of the place where, as she said, they seemed to be heading, should be safe. Soldiers are standing there and everything around is fenced with a protective barrier. Rorin mentally noted that his guess was correct and, admitting that this was probably the only reasonable way out, decided to definitely talk about it with Lapis. Then he turned to the girl and asked what she was going to do next. The girl with a sparkle in her eyes eagerly asked to be taken with him because she could not reach the master's house on her own. As a citizen of Konza, she promised to serve the head's family and take care of them. She introduced herself as Sutel and sincerely asked for permission to join. Saw thanked True politely. Crass, looking at the events, dryly said that they had found a survivor and politely invited her inside. Rorin mentally noted that Crass remained cautious, as he had been asked. His actions showed honesty and responsibility. At first, Ruin considered Krasus a self-absorbed fool, but now he had to admit that he was not so bad. Perhaps earlier he behaved that way because of the toxic environment he found himself in. Lapis gladly greeted Rorin on his return. He asked how the treatment was going, and she replied that the treatment was completed, but she still could not enter. Then she looked interestedly at her new companion, and noticed that they had not returned empty-handed. Rorin explained that Sutel was a survivor they found in the city, and unfortunately, she was the only one. He said that while the sun was still high, they should gather and head to the residence because now was the best time. Lapis agreed that this was sound advice, and added that the 3 patients who were injured in an unknown way were gradually recovering and would soon be well. But with Angie, it was much more complicated. Due to the injuries received, her internal organs suffered from bleeding and compression, so she was in a serious condition, and Lapis insisted. Angie in such a state must not be moved under any circumstances. Rorin inquired how long the recovery would take. Lapis said that at least today she needed to rest. Tomorrow Laura would probably regain consciousness and apply her healing spells, and by the end of tomorrow, Angie could be carefully moved. Rorin admitted that haste could cost Angie her life, and suggested leaving Cross with her while they and the rest set out for the residence. Lapis, hearing Lauren's thoughts about leaving part of the group and moving on without Angie, felt that this proposal sounded cold-blooded and merciless. Loren ironically reminded her that it was she, with her priestly past, who accused him of callousness. After a short pause, Lapis gathered herself and returned to the main point. She asked how they would act in such a situation. Rorin suggested spending the night on the spot, and setting out only when everyone in the group had sufficiently recovered to walk the road without risking their lives. Lapis clearly accepted this decision, and said she would immediately start preparing for the night, so that everyone would be comfortable and safe. Sutel, standing nearby, gladly offered her help, ready to organize lodging and provide the necessary services. Lapis politely but firmly refused her help. Then she asked Sen and Sutel to spend the rest of the time until morning separately, in different rooms. Sutel, embarrassed and a little worried, asked why she was not even allowed to take care of this, and Senator Lapis, calm as always, explained that if she really wanted to work with the group, she had to obediently follow orders and not get in the way. She sternly warned, if she objected or refused to follow instructions, Sutel's further presence in their group would become impossible. Sutel was confused by the sudden warning, but did not object. Santa, a little worried, called Sutel, as if hoping the situation would become clear. Lauren, sensing the tension in the air, rushed to intervene. Lapis suddenly realized that perhaps she had been too harsh, immediately apologized and explained that such words were an echo of her strict training in those years when she was forming as a priestess. But she insisted that Sutel fulfill her request and follow the instructions, adding that it would not take much effort and was quite within her power. So they understood. Arguing was pointless, so they humbly agreed. Lapis took the initiative into her own hands, invited Sutel to go with her to the room that she had received, and at the same time called Sina to join. Senna, clearly unwilling to part with her brother, turned to Rorin and shyly asked if she could stay with him. Lapis firmly stated that it was impossible. Warren, sitting down next to the girl, gently explained. He himself did not quite understand what was happening yet, but was firmly convinced it would be safer for her to stay inside the building than to be outside. He added that the premises were guarded by a reliable and kind guy, and then promised, tomorrow they would definitely go look for her parents. Sina, listening to his words, agreed to the proposal and nodded. Meanwhile, in Roran's thoughts, unease crept in, and he quietly hoped that everything would really end well, and that his hopes, despite all the oddities, would be justified.